Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to tonight's City Council meeting. This meeting is called to order. I kindly ask our city clerk to please take the roll call.
Bruno.
Here.
Burkhardt.
Here.
Clements.
Here.
Ruby.
Here.
Haven.
Here.
Kilberg.
Here.
Maladra.
Here.
Marks.
Here.
McGowan.
Here.
Swanson.
Here. We have a full house tonight, which is fantastic. I would like to ask our friend, former State Representative Steve Anderson, to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag.
Before we dive into the topic at hand, ladies and gentlemen, some of you may have noticed and certainly heard about the passing of a former colleague, an alderman and friend, Robert Langdis, last week. It was a tough week for Geneva. We lost a firefighter, John Schultz, and former council member Bob Langdis. I had the opportunity to visit with the Langdis family, and they granted me permission to keep the flag lowered to half-staff, and also to begin tonight's meeting with a moment of silence. For some of you who might not be aware, Mr. Langdis called Geneva home, born up north, went to St. Charles East High School, came to Geneva, served 12 years on the city council, 12 years as public safety chair, was on the Del Nor Community Hospital board when Del Nor and that other hospital in St. Charles merged and built in Geneva. He was a member of several organizations in the community. He had 3 beautiful children and a lovely wife, Joyce. They were married since 1940. So Mr. Langdis not only served our community, he also served our nation in the Army. And with that, we want to send condolences to his family, to his friends, and of course to our community as well. So if we could begin tonight with just a moment of silence to recognize Bob's extraordinary service to all of us, I think the family would be grateful. Thanks very much. Just for the record, ladies and gentlemen, there is just a city council meeting this evening. There is no committee of the whole meeting to follow. In case someone is here curious, we have one item of business tonight, and that is to entertain a motion to approve the recommendations of the Planning and Zoning Commission related to the regulation of adult use recreational and medical cannabis businesses.
So,
Motion
second.
by Alderman Marks, seconded by Alderman Bruno. This matter is on the floor for discussion. We're going to follow the format as I'm about to outline. This is not a public hearing, ladies and gentlemen. That public hearing was held at the Planning Commission and Zoning Board about a month or so ago. Tonight is, however, an opportunity for public comment. And as all of you know who have attended meetings in the past, we invite and we encourage anyone to speak to the issues that are on the agenda. I do, however, ask that if you choose to speak to this topic, you obviously join us at the podium. Share with us your name. You do not have to share your address if you choose not to. You do not have to represent yourself as a particular group or organization unless you so choose, but we do need to have your name. We also ask that you speak to the issue at hand, and that issue is zoning, zoning only. This is not relitigating what the House of Representatives have done, or the Senate, or Governor Pritzker. This is not an issue to be redebated here tonight. This is strictly a zoning matter. So if we could all pledge to abide by those ramparts, I think the evening would go much smoother. Following comments from the public, I will invite our Community Development Director, Mr. David DeGroot, to make a fairly robust presentation on the law, on how the Planning and Zoning Commission rendered their decision that we're considering this evening. Following that, we will open up discussion at the council. There will not be another opportunity for public comment once the matter has reached the council. Any questions? The floor is open to anyone who has joined us this evening to speak to this issue. Seeing none, Yes. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak.
Of course.
I thought I might not be able to because I was a minute late.
No, it's fantastic. We're glad you're here.
Okay, well, hello, aldermen and mayor, city attorney, city clerk, everyone else.
Could you give us your name, please, ma'am?
Oh, yes, Susan George,
Thank you.
and I live here in Geneva. So I attended the zoning committee, and I would like to read some quotes from them. One of the commission members was Terry Debates, and Terry said, she was referring to something that Mr. DeGroot had said. She said, what Mr. DeGroot said, that this is just another product and it's legal and people are able, maybe it is, but it's not legal federally yet. And there are a lot of states that this gentleman pointed out that are not doing this. So we're going to have people crossing state lines, crossing city lines, crossing whatever, whether it adds whatever problems it's going to create some sort of problems. I think we are putting the cart before the horse. I'm not clear on why we are doing this. If we approve this, what we are doing is rubber stamping and green lighting this for the city council. Then they will say, well, zoning and planning already approved it, so we're good to go. It pushes it one step further down the road for them. And to continue, she said, I don't think that we should be doing this, and I think we could opt out. What's the big deal? Why don't we take the stand that Naperville or Batavia or whoever did? Let's give it a year. Maybe in a year they'll have a way to test people when they are driving. Maybe in a year we will see what these communities do. And then another member of the zoning commission said, John Rittenhouse, he said, what's the upside for our community? What's the upside for all of this for our community? I really don't know. I don't think 3% means a lot to Geneva in terms of the revenue. If it was money, that's one thing. I don't think it is. Number two, what's the rush? To Terry's point, this is going to be law January 1st, and then he continued his comments. And then I thought it was interesting what I believe it was the city attorney said. He was sitting next to DeGroot at the zoning commission. Was that you?
I was there, yes.
Okay, you look like the same guy, but the video is a little hard to see sometimes. So this gentleman, which I think was the city attorney, said, the council's decision to ultimately opt out, and everyone should know it is an opt-out statute. The law is in the state of Illinois, effective January 1st, 2020, it's permitted unless a village or city opts out, and there's a hard deadline on that. He said, there is, let me look at my notes here. Another comment he made, I certainly understand why some think maybe the cart is before the horse. I think that is not an unreasonable perspective. And then another comment, he said, there is, again, good, bad, right or wrong, and I certainly understand the skepticism about the state's regulatory capacities. I think that's fair skepticism. So clearly I oppose marijuana, but I want to say all forms, growing, infusing, selling medication, I am opposed to it, and I plead with you to protect our city, to at least take some time and see how it plays out in other communities. And thank you very much.
Before I invite the next guest to speak, I do want to address one thing that Mrs. George raised, and you reminded me of something. I've had numerous conversations and email correspondence with folks who have asked, and perhaps even amplified what you said that was said at the Planning and Zoning Commission, and that is cart before the horse. I will remind the council, and I will remind the community who was present at that meeting. During the 2+ hour discussion regarding this topic, I asked the council present, and I reminded them that we have the option to opt out. Does this council agree that we should forward this matter to the Planning and Zoning Commission for their due diligence and process regarding zoning? Everyone unanimously agreed to advance this matter to the Planning and Zoning Commission for their consideration. The cart would be before the horse if we just said, send it along. We had that opportunity to say as a council, let's opt out now. That said, we still have that opportunity this evening to opt out, should we choose. We have the opportunity to accept the recommendations from the Planning and Zoning Commission as written, if we choose. And we have the opportunity to amend those recommendations, if we choose. So I don't take umbrage, but I do take pause in assuming to my good friends and colleagues on the Planning and Zoning Commission that this city council passed the buck. We did not. We advanced this matter based on unanimous support by this council to allow that group, that independent authority, to consider zoning matters relative to this topic. Because they've done their job, and I think they've done their job well, that matter has to come back to us for our final consideration. So I hope that's clear. Whoever's next. Mrs. O'Halloran, welcome.
Good evening. Thank you, Mayor Burns, for that clarification, because
Of course.
it was very muddled and confusing to all of us that night. So thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
I just wanted to mention that my thoughts tonight not only come from facts and research, but my actual personal experience working with and collaborating with children and youth and all the people and organizations in Geneva for many, many years. As I begin, I dedicate what I'm about to say to Chick and Linda Williams, former prevention intervention specialists hired by the City of Geneva and the Geneva School District 304. These two people gave everything they had to promote the health and well-being of our Geneva children, youth, and families. They were available 24/7 for anyone in need of help. I have had the great honor and privilege of working with both of them. They were and are the cornerstone of the excellent work our community has done to support, educate, and affirm healthy lifestyles in our community for over 25 years. We even won the State of Illinois Red Ribbon Award for our extensive, comprehensive year-round work collaborating with every component of our community to promote health and well-being among our youth and families. You cannot place a dollar value on a child or a youth's life, their health, or their well-being. Opt out of the sale of dispensaries in Geneva. To have dispensaries in Geneva, you are giving a clear message to our children and our youth. It's okay. It's safe to use marijuana. I've tried it. No big deal. To opt out is to give a clear message to our kids and community that it is not okay. It is not healthy nor in character with our community values, safety, and well-being. The packet John and I gave to each of you covers every aspect of why you need to opt out, all based on facts and research. All the work we have done for over 25 years in Geneva to educate on all drugs and its disastrous effects on the physical and mental health and well-being of our children, our youth, and actually all our citizens of any age. Are you really willing to undo all that incredible work for supposedly, quote unquote, financial gain, or your own lack of education on this issue, or saying, I've tried it, no big deal? Our community has embraced in its mission and purpose since the inception of the Geneva Strategic Plan a healthy, safe environment for all our citizens. The Red Ribbon Campaign each year has emphasized that for the last 25 years. Geneva just celebrated Red Ribbon Week at the end of October, and at this time, all of you here, our mayor, all of you endorsed this campaign and all it stands for. Red Ribbon Week is not a one-week campaign. It lasts all year long for our entire community to educate every component and aspect of our community on the dangers of marijuana, alcohol, opiates, fentanyl, abuse of prescription drugs, and so much more that are plaguing our kids and our families.
Mrs. O'Halloran, forgive me,
Yes, I'm sorry.
and certainly the council can overrule me should they so choose. My preamble earlier this evening was regarding the topic at hand, which is zoning.
And I'll tell you how that fits in.
Okay,
How it fits in, it's perfect.
okay.
How it fits in is if you zone to do this. The consequences, these are the consequences, and this will undermine enormous amount of work if you let me continue. That's what this all goes to that.
Okay.
Thank you, Mayor.
I want to be true to the spirit of tonight's discussion. All of us, I think, have had multiple discussions and correspondence regarding, to use broadly the term, morality. Tonight is not about relitigating what our friends in Springfield have done. Whether or not we like it or don't like it, we are charged now with discussing only the zoning matter.
I understand.
So I just
I
want to
understand
be
that.
very, very careful that we don't
And this isn't about morality. A lot of people on the council don't understand the roots of the work that's been done in this community and how far-reaching it is. And if you opt in, this work is going to be, I just want, as you make a clear decision, just want you to realize what you have and what could be destroyed. That's why I'm doing this. It's the work I've done and been involved in, and others. A lot of people, a lot of citizens don't understand all these components, so I'm trying to pull it together.
Okay.
Okay, so here I go. The Geneva Coalition for Youth was born out of this extensive work and encompasses every aspect of the community. Its mission statement, Geneva Coalition for Youth, is dedicated to networking with community organizations and providing education and resources to assist youth and their families in making healthy lifestyle choices. It is a community-based networking group of parents and representatives from many organizations in which the Tri-City area have direct contact and involvement. They do year-round work. I also want to cite the work we have done and still do with the Geneva Police Department. Here's a direct quote from former Chief Kidwell, and I know Chief Pacelli is here tonight. Chief Kidwell told me this at Sunset because we both exercise there. And he said, and I have such great respect for him, he said, one of our greatest accomplishments as a police department is we have evolved from being punitive to getting our youth and adults the help they need. He's so proud of that. And he said it was all the work that we all did together that opened their eyes, there's a better way. So they can lead kids and adults to resources where they can get help and get well. We are also proud of the Kane County Sheriff's Department getting the youth and adults the resources they need to get well and become the best version of themselves. We also want to mention tonight the amazing work that Kane County Drug Court that it accomplished, helping young people get the help they need and adults so they can get well and become productive citizens. There are literally many miracles that have happened because of all this work and working with all the different departments and people that I have just mentioned. To vote to have marijuana dispensaries in Geneva anywhere would not only undermine and ruin the many years of this excellent work, but it would be a disaster to every aspect of our community, no matter where you zone it. The bottom line is, do the right thing. Educate yourself, understand the facts about marijuana, what it really is, what it really does, and why other communities have opted out. Do not buy into the false notion that dispensaries will bring revenue to Geneva. All you have to do, we had a man speak at the zoning commission, is look at Colorado. And he just came back to Geneva, he was born here, and he spoke to this issue, what it's really like when you live with it. What it will bring us, as I said before, is devastating consequences. Remember the purpose of the city of Geneva, a direct quote from your strategic plan 2017. Quote, "It is to advance our well-being and quality of life by honoring our heritage and cultivating dynamic, engaged, diverse, and a sustainable community." Okay, so bottom lining, vote no, opt out. We are better than this and we are smarter than this. Stay true to the mission, character, and values of our Geneva heritage for which you were elected and entrusted to by our community. And thank you all very much. And I have a book I gave to Mayor Burns, but written by an investigative reporter from the New York Times called Tell Your Children the Truth About Marijuana, Mental Illness, and Violence. And it's based on, it's not a fiction thing, it's based on actual research. So if anyone of you would like a copy, I would be happy to give it to you. Thank you all very much.
Mrs. O'Halloran, may I ask you a question?
Yes.
As a follow-up? You referenced rather passionately and eloquently your opposition to dispensaries. Does that opposition stand for the other 5 elements of the state law? Growing, transportation, infusing?
Every aspect of it.
Every aspect of
Yeah,
it.
and I know they passed it as a law, I get that, but we have an opportunity to opt out, and I'm explaining to you why I think we should opt out.
Got it.
And I think Susan mentioned that if you want to further research this and everything, then maybe wait and see how this all works out and the communities have done this. Thank you very much.
Thank you
Did I
very
answer
much.
your question?
Yes, thank
Okay,
you.
thank you.
Mr. This gentleman, Mr. Anderson, and then Colin had it first, okay. Colin, welcome, sir.
Thank you. My name is Colin Campbell. I live in Geneva. I started my career as an addictions counselor working with youth in Suffolk County, New York, 1971, and had a long career primarily working with young people until we helped to develop a counselor training program once it became an official field where you could get licensure and certification. And I ended up heading up that program and teaching chemical dependency counseling at Suffolk Community College for 10 years. So I have had some personal history in this. Speaking to zoning, the notion that by placing a dispensary in a certain location, say in an industrial area, you can somehow or another limit access to marijuana by people who should, by law, should not be getting it. We have had this notion in our country for about 150 years now, that the way to solve the problems that are associated with psychoactive drugs is to keep those drugs away from people. The first laws against marijuana were passed actually after the Civil War in Texas as a way of making outlaws of illegal immigrants who came across the border to work in the cotton fields to replace the slaves. And they cost too much, so they made it illegal. They could arrest them and then rent them back out to the farmers for free. That's where it started with marijuana. heroin was developed by the Bayer Company to cure morphine addiction. We have been through so much mythology and so much nonsense. And our problem here has been that we have treated this problem with psychoactive drugs, which is a real problem, primarily as a legal one, and it is not. It has never worked. The height of prohibition, which started generally federally in this country with the Harrison Anti-Narcotics Acts, 1912, 1914. And this whole attempt at outlawing the problem, let's make it illegal and that'll solve it, was based on religious fervor and political opportunism rather than medical science. And there wasn't much science they were to work with back then. We have more today. So the notion that by placing a dispensary in a certain location we can reduce the danger, or by not having dispensaries at all we can reduce the danger, or by continuing to make drugs illegal we can reduce the danger, has been disproven time and time and time and time again. This should not be a legal problem. It should be a public health problem. I cannot tell you how many times I have been told by young people, high school age, junior high school, even elementary school sometimes, oh, I can get marijuana easier than I can get alcohol. I can get cocaine easier than I can get alcohol. Placing or not placing a dispensary in town is not going to change that. Kids are curious. Humans are curious. Kids will try. Education, intervention, treatment are the ways that we need to deal with this. And now that we have some legal marijuana states, there is some evidence beginning to emerge that marijuana use amongst young people is going down. Perhaps it is it's legal, so it's no big deal anymore. We do know that in several countries in Europe that have virtually legalized all drugs, Portugal is an example, drug abuse, drug addiction, and drug crime has plummeted. What we have done with this whole notion of creating laws against drugs has not lessened the availability of drugs. It has simply created a huge worldwide criminal enterprise, which our use of cocaine from Colombia virtually destroyed that country. Now we're destroying Mexico. It's because it is so saleable here. The DEA makes huge drug busts and brags of all of the drugs they've caught, but the price of drugs on the street doesn't go up a penny because the availability is so great. The drug laws don't work. Warren Harding was the first president to say, "I'm declaring war on drugs." Well, it's time to recognize that's not working anymore. What I would like to see is that a certain percentage of the tax revenue that is realized from all of these dispensaries in Illinois goes directly to treatment and prevention. If we put a lot more money and a lot more effort into that, I think we would do a lot better. Use the drugs to prevent the problem rather than passing a law which doesn't prevent the problem. The tax revenue can be used that way, and it would be very, very valuable. But just say no to drugs doesn't work. I've lost too many kids. But we've saved a lot of them too, through education, through availability of treatment, and that can work. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Anderson.
Thank you, Mayor, members
Evening,
of the
sir.
City Council. It's a pleasure to be here in front of you. So I stand or I rise in support of the ordinance. And I'm actually going to try to stick to the topic at hand, which is the zoning question, not the overreaching question. Some of you may be aware of my history. For about 30 years, I've been a municipal attorney. So zoning, land development, it's kind of in my wheelhouse. Then I had a shorter period of time where I was a state representative, and now I serve as a commissioner of human rights for the state of Illinois. Oddly enough, all three pieces factor into what I want to talk about here tonight. The first, of course, is the zoning aspect. If you look at any preamble to any zoning ordinance, including your own, it talks about the purposes of zoning. Purposes of zoning are to enhance the quality of life, preserve the values of the community, and that includes business development. Business development is absolutely a legitimate aspect and goal of your land use development ordinances, your zoning ordinances. So it's important to recognize what we're talking about here. We're talking about development. We're talking about business development. Step two, like I said, I was a state representative for a while, and this is really only to be in full disclosure. When I was a state representative, I was the chief co-sponsor on this bill, along with Kelly Cassidy in the House. Just want to be fully disclosing of that fact. But the third aspect is the human rights aspect, what I do now. My job is to ensure or attempt to ensure that our laws are enforced uniformly and that we provide for social equity in the world. In other words, we try to lift up people who have been historically disadvantaged throughout the years. That's actually in play here. It's interesting because the way this law was built was to address the social equity piece as well. And you, as a community, have an opportunity to capitalize on that. And what I mean by this is there's the concept within the bill, or within now the public law, that says that social equity can be taken into account in developing who becomes the licensee in your community, who can apply for grants, and who can be encouraged to develop. The reason for that is that the war on drugs has generally been recognized as disproportionately impactful on people in the lower quadrants of the socioeconomic scale, largely African Americans, also the Latinx community. So the idea is let's make and create opportunities that allow those people in business development to rise up, to have the opportunity to develop. This ordinance can dovetail into it. Doesn't right now. Your ordinance is strictly zoning, and I acknowledge that. But you have the opportunity to do more than that, to say we want to work with the state. The IDFPR, which is the Illinois Illinois Department of Professional and Financial Regulation, is charged with administering this. They are charged with providing grants to the social equity piece of this. In other words, those who have been historically discriminated against. And you as a local government, unlike most of the time, because you're a non-home rule community, have the ability to work with IDFPR to develop programs with the money that you raise. In other words, Colin suggested spending some of the money on therapy programs. I think that's a great idea. I'd like to spend some of it in a different way, which is to say, let's create grants. Let's create opportunities for those persons in the minority communities to become the owners of the business in Geneva. Why is that important? Well, I hope I don't have to explain that it's important that we have diversity. It's a part of our own strategic plan, and we don't have a lot of it here right now. In fact, we've seen recently in communities like our own, a little further east of us and a little larger, that there's been really a bubbling up of racism, again, in places we would have never expected it. And I think we also see that although that hasn't happened in our beautiful community, there have been undercurrents in zoning decisions that weren't even in our city, by the way, but nonetheless impact Geneva, that raise that social equity question. So if we see that happening, are there ways for us to counter that? Are there ways for us to walk the walk and talk the talk of saying, yes, we want to be inclusive. Yes, we want to invite diverse portions of our world into our community. We don't just want to be Geneva of the 1950s. We want to be Geneva of 2019. This ordinance, this bill, this public law, has the opportunity for you to do that, to do more than simply license it, more than that, but to use that power to bootstrap that into something more, which is this social equity piece. And then to bring it all the way back to zoning. One of my own concerns, I'm being perfectly candid, is I don't love the way the vape shop looks locally. It's not attractive, right? You may or may not agree with me. The one in St. Charles on Randall Road that says Kratom, I don't know what Kratom is, but it doesn't look attractive either. The one thing you can do here is with this bootstrap, with the social equity piece, is you can provide grants. Well, when you grant something, you can also ask for something. And in this case, you could ask for aesthetics, more than you can normally do in your zoning ordinance. You can say, we really want this store to look like an Apple store rather than the Kratom shop. And guess what? That's actually happened. If you Google the concept of aesthetics and cannabis, you'll find that that's the leading edge of it, is things like they look like Apple stores. They look like they look very cool instead of very sketchy. But you have the opportunity to do that by combining or bootstrapping all of these different pieces. Is this easy? No, but you don't have to do all that tonight. But you do have to do step one, which is to approve it, to zone it, to allow it to occur. And then in further steps, you can look at opportunities to do this. Bottom line for me, ladies and gentlemen, is our streetscape on 3rd Street looks historic. Our brand is historic. But I don't want our values to be historic. I want them to be modern. And that means regulating things and helping people by use of that regulation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Good evening. I'm Dr. John Kiefer, internal medicine cardiologist, practicing here for 40 years. And I live on 210 South Bennett Street. I wanted to make a couple comments. I was at the zoning board meeting last month, and I just wanted to try to clarify something that I thought wasn't clear, was that we already do have medical marijuana dispensaries in the area. And I think what we're trying to talk about here is whether we want recreational marijuana dispensaries.
Well, Dr. Kiefer, if I may just, again, remind everyone that while the comments have been primarily about dispensaries or recreational cannabis, all elements are to be considered this evening that were advanced to us from the Planning and Zoning Commission. But if people want to talk specifically about dispensaries, that's certainly your privilege to do so. But we're also discussing, in theory.
I mean, if it's my impression that if the city council wants to provide a service to give marijuana to people that might want it, say, you know, a veteran or something who says or feels he has PTSD or something and wants a prescription for it, is available. He just has to be in the medical cannabis patient prescription program, sign a form, and there's about 100 diagnoses that you can get marijuana for if you're in this program. And so there are dispensaries. There's one in St. Charles and there's one in Aurora, so it's already kind of available. So I think if we had recreational marijuana here, it wouldn't be something that isn't readily available to people that feel they need it. Secondly, in terms of the zoning, when you have shops that are recreational dispensaries, one of the things that people think that marijuana might be good for is nausea and vomiting. So a lot of times, like a pregnant mom might come in and have this problem and might get some advice there. Now, I don't know if that's a zoning issue, if they give advice, say that, yes, you can take it for nausea and vomiting.
That's not a zoning issue. If that was a zoning issue,
Where
we'd
they
have
give
people
medical
heading into
advice,
kinder
it's,
care.
yeah, it's like
yeah.
competition.
That's not a zoning matter at all.
But there's a lot of harms that come to the babies from this, where people would give advice to just go ahead and take this, and then the baby's going to be born with a tremor or a
Dr. Kiefer, again,
high-pitched
that's
cry.
not a zoning matter, sir, respectfully.
Well, it seems that we've heard a lot about the legal matters, that because it's legally okay to do it, we should just, give it. But it's a drug that's kind of disproportionately affecting the young. There'll be a higher incidence of motor vehicle accidents that is a leading cause of death for 15 to 20-year-olds. We'll see more addiction as it becomes more available. It affects productivity. People's IQ can drop. And there's evidence that it affects the developing brain, where the brain seems to be developing even up to the age of 23. So kids that take this just don't do as well. So it's something that it may be legal, but it doesn't mean it's good for people. And I think we're kind of making the young suffer the more available it is. In terms of the revenue, there is some revenue, but Colorado's found that the cost of marijuana and some of those issues I mentioned is $4.50 for every dollar they bring in. National Health Institute says it costs $10 for every dollar they bring in. And lastly, I think Geneva's kind of a destination city, and if we look at some of the western cities where the recreational marijuana is available, San Francisco, Seattle. We had somebody speak at the zoning committee about Colorado Springs. My son lives in Boulder. People don't want to go and shop there anymore. So even though it's legal, it can, change the character of the town by having it easily available. And the medical effects fall disproportionately on the young who don't know maybe what they're getting into. So, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes. How are you, Paula?
Good, how are you?
Good.
Hi, everybody. I'm Paula Merrington. Just want to make sure we're talking about the same thing. We were talking about zoning. It's for sale 21 and over, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Marijuana is freely available in Geneva, unregulated, unknown strength, unknown origin. That's not going to change. But I would hope that people that choose to use marijuana would be able to buy it, or they could drive half a mile down the road and buy it in St. Charles. We miss out on the tax revenue on that. So I think that relitigating the dangers of marijuana, the horse is out of the barn. It's going to be everywhere. If the youth want it, they can still get it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Silvestri.
I don't know if that's a good thing that you called me by my name right back there. I think that means I've been here too many times. But Arnie Silvestri, Geneva resident, as most of you know, I sent you guys an email regarding some zoning issues. So I'm going to talk strictly zoning. Our family has a business that we currently do candies and chocolates and things like that. And with the new processor infuser license, we are looking into actually applying. We currently work with some of the growers, send them product that they then infuse and send out to their dispensaries. The way the Plan Commission kicked back the ordinance to you guys shows a 150-foot setback from residential daycares and yeah, that's it, residential and daycares and schools, correct. And So I'm looking at it, trying to figure out, where do we get this 150 foot from, and how does that affect us? I think you guys know we're at 2248 Gary Lane. I have some distances that I printed out that I can pass out to you guys, and, basically, we are about 250 feet from property line to property line to a residential. The church is directly across the street from us, and in that situation, there's a 66-foot right-of-way for the road, and, building to building, we're over 150 feet. If you're at the back of our lot, the front of our lot, where does this 150 feet come into? I also talked to you guys a little bit about how the product would come in and out of our facility. It's something that would come in and out and no one would ever know it was there. As my description in the letter that I sent you guys stated, it's all RFID tagged, tracked, GPS monitored. So there's really no opportunity for the product to go anywhere but directly into our facility, done what we need to do with it, then rescanned and directly sent back out to the growers or whoever sent it to us, and then they distribute it. Part of, what we have to do in order to get the license from the state is a security and operations plan, which I'm in the process of putting together right now, and I just have an outline of it, and I'm going to hand that out to you guys so that you can kind of go through it. And this is just the outline. This isn't the actual, each one of these items, I have about 10 items, with each one of them has 5 to 10 sub-items, and each one of these represents 4 or 5 pages, in the actual plan, because we're in the process of working on it. But the plan, when it's done for security and operations and handling of the product and going in and out of our facility, will be probably 200 to 300 pages. So, I really would like to request the council to take a look at the 150-foot setback. And, I'm here to answer any questions that you guys might have about how it's going to work, what would happen, and, just kind of clarify that it's not, find out why their thought process came about for the 150 feet.
That matter will be shared by Mr. DeGroot, and let me just add one comment to Mr. Silvestri's comments. You and I had a long conversation regarding your email correspondence, and we had come to agreement that despite Mr. Silvestri's comments this evening, the issue regarding the 150-foot buffer that the Planning and Zoning Commission put into place is above and beyond what the state requires, number one. Number two, that buffer would apply to all areas of the city, not just to Mr. Silvestri's company. So while Arnie speaks to his company alone, his comments are not specifically to his interests alone, it's to the entire community, and this council has to consider that as a community-wide consideration, not for one specific business.
Correct. And from my standpoint, I feel like you guys will be getting a special use permit anyway. So therefore, we'll be coming in front of you, showing you the full-blown security plan, which you guys have the outline of, how it's going to happen, what's going to go through it. So you're going to be able to make decisions on, does this company have everything that it takes to make sure that it's done safely and securely in our community? So that's, kind of, I think there's a little bit of redundancy there. I think that the special use permit itself gives you guys the individual opportunities to really scrutinize the applicant, the location, where it's going, obviously the overall zoning, industrial park. That's where you're going to find a food processor like us.
And of course, everyone on the council, I know, is well aware, but on the off chance someone tuning in or present tonight is not, the city of Geneva does not issue any license for any element of any cannabis business. Those licenses are issued by the state. When and if the state issues a license, that's where the city council comes into play, Planning and Zoning Commission, et cetera. So.
Right.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. O'Halloran.
Good evening, I'm John O'Halloran. Mary Lou is my wife. She spoke to you earlier, and I have a few comments. I'm not really clear what you're deciding tonight, but I think you can decide to opt out. I think that's what you said, Kevin, and I believe that's an issue, and that's what I'm suggesting, that you opt out. What is the rush? I don't understand what the big rush is right now to approve an ordinance on something that is not even legal yet, not until January 1st. We don't have a legal marijuana as we stand here today, and we're trying to project and we're trying to come up with provisions and zoning and other issues on things that we don't even know about. We don't know what the uses are all going to be about. What is the rush? If we opt out tonight, it doesn't stop you from revisiting this in the future. Once we get some experience, see what other communities do, see how it impacts them, how it works out. I do thank you all, though, for your effort and your time and managing our city. I know you've done a good job. There's been a lot of discussion, especially on this issue, and I appreciate that. And I've experienced some of that myself. I've been here for 40 years in Geneva, over 40 years, and I've worked on different committees and different things. And I have found that the Geneva, the process that we have developed, whether it's purposeful or it's just the way it's worked out, we have a very deliberative process when we decide issues that come before us. That includes studying, research, talking to other communities, looking at other facilities. We talk to anyone who may be impacted by a decision we have to make. Zoning, this zoning issue, I think if it's just what is being presented from the Plan Commission, I'm not really sure all the aspects of it that you're trying to decide or you're trying to work out tonight. But if, as Kevin says, that you have the opportunity or the right to amend all this or to change it, well, then, you know, we're revisiting things again, aren't we? I mean, that's, if you have a right to do it, then you're going to be, you have the right to revisit what the zoning commission did or recommended for you or didn't recommend for you. My wife and I have always been proponents of providing a safe and healthy community for our youth, and whatever that means and however that comes about, whether it's through zoning, whether it's through legislation, whether it's through making sure things are in process to help our kids and our youth. I cannot see how, at this stage anyway, allowing zoning for a dispensary and the other 4 or 5 pieces of this legislation is going to help our community, is going to help our youth. In fact, I think it's going to be, as my wife said out, it's going to send a message to our youth that it's okay. But it's not okay. Even as the learned gentleman, the counselor, told us, it is still not okay to use marijuana, and it's not okay for us to promote it. We do need facilities. We do need rehab. And Geneva has been good about that. Geneva has, through Chick Williams, if those who you knew him, he was our rehab and counselor, and he was our intervention counselor. We're far ahead of all that. We've seen that and we've done that. And because of that, we have provided our community and our youth with a very safe, or at least as much as we can, and healthy environment. At least we try to. We can now go to the police if we have an issue with drugs or marijuana without being worried about punitive measures. We can go to our schools. They have things in place that we can get help if we need it for our kids or anybody else who has an issue or problem with any kind of the marijuana or alcohol or whatever it is. Geneva has a strong history of studying issues. We have Historic Preservation Committee, we have Cultural Arts Committee, we have a Strategic Plan Committee, we have a Tree Preservation Plan, and we have numerous other groups that are, goes to the benefit of our city. These have all been a product of who we are as Geneva. Have we consulted and have we done the research that we really can to address this issue, whether it's through zoning or whatever way we'd go about it? I haven't seen anything from the police department, the fire department, the medical community, except for what Dr. Kiefer said tonight, addiction prevention and treatment specialists, our schools, our Kane County Drug Court judges and personnel, our state's attorney's office. I think we need to at least consider addressing or getting information from all those and anyone else who may have some information as to how having a zoning ordinance allowing dispensaries and cultivation centers and craft growers, how that would impact our community. I think we need to do that. We need to study that. We need to ask them. It hasn't been done as far as I know. And so we will have time. We opt out tonight. We'll have time to revisit this. We can do that in the future. There's no big rush. Geneva is not here in dire straits, looking for revenue. In fact, in the 40 years or plus that I've been here, I've probably supported every referendum that's given by the school or to support our growth and things that we need. Geneva will do that. Geneva is very supportive of all these issues. So we don't need the revenue. That's not the issue. So what's the big rush? I've probably seen more discussion, publicly anyway, and more research talked about on the apartments on Richard Street, public restrooms, skate park, tree ordinances, historical preservation issues than I really have seen on this. I haven't seen much public discussion on this, at least not satisfactory to what I would think we should have as a city to allow this the zoning. So we talk about recreational marijuana facilities, dispensaries. Well, we don't know what they look like. I mean, we can go to Colorado, we can go to California, we can see that, but what do they look like in Illinois? We don't know yet because there aren't any. What about the cultivation facilities? Now, I'm not sure that a cultivation facility would fit in our community. I don't think, from a zoning point of view, it would fit anywhere. I'm not sure. I think that's the zoning and plan commission said. But regardless, what does that look like? Have we seen them? Do we know what they look like? What they're going to bring us as far as issues? Craft growers. Now, craft growers are the cultivation, but they also can infuse, they can prepare product, and I guess and do other things. I don't know. I've not seen it, and no one here has seen it. We don't know what they've done. We don't know how they work or how they operate. We don't know what impact it will have on our community facilities as far as water, waste, electricity. We don't know what impact it has on it. What about environmental impacts? Does anyone know what the environmental impact is from a cultivation or a craft growing facility is? I don't think we do, because no one's seen it. Don't you think we should look at that and try and figure out what it is and observe it before we jump into it and allow it? We know that the cultivation centers and the growing of marijuana uses pesticides. We know that. So how do we control those pesticides? Can we control the pesticides? Maybe it can be. I don't know. But if we don't know, why should we jump in and allow that at this time without more information? As Kevin pointed out, the city does not license these facilities. The state does. So the burden's on the state. Now, I don't think the state has completed all its regulations for all these facilities. I think they're still being developed. I don't think the state has the staff yet to enforce or oversee these facilities at this time. If they have, I don't know, but I don't think so, but I don't think they have yet. So we have to rely upon the state to monitor and enforce and control these facilities. What remedy does the Geneva have in that? What do we do? We can't revoke their license. We have to go to the state and say, hey, listen, we think something's going wrong here, and do you think you can help us? Well, they may not be able to help us. The proposed ordinance, now I looked at the proposed ordinance as far as I could see was taken from the Illinois Municipal League as a model. And I think that's where it's taken from, and with modifications. And one of the modifications was the setbacks. The Illinois Municipal League, their model ordinance said 250 feet setback. Geneva has reduced it to 150 feet, and I think it was because we couldn't get it to fit in all the areas where we wanted to get to fit into. I don't think that's an appropriate reason to reduce the setbacks. In fact, I suggest that that should be discussed more thoroughly. The Village of Deerfield, I think, has a 1,000-foot setback for churches and for schools and daycare centers, 500 for churches, and I think for parks. We don't have anything in the setback or in this ordinance that has been proposed referring to our parks, referring to the library, referring to churches, any setbacks for them. They're not in that definition. I think they should be. At least there should be some discussion about it. What about recreational facilities? We could have any number of recreational facilities that may be impacted, especially in industrial areas. There's all kinds of things that are set up there. We have in other communities, they have these gyms and these other things that could be there. So that's something that we should look at and consider also, which we haven't done. So I think we have to look at the ordinance very closely and determine and have it really defined for us, where would these facilities be located? Where would the dispensaries, where are the areas where they could be located? I disagree. I don't think we want them on 3rd Street. I don't think we want them in downtown. I just don't think we do. I think that's, it goes against everything that Geneva's, since 1835, that we've been established and we've promoted. We don't want that. So I have a real problem with that, and I think we need to address, look at and say, what other setbacks have to be in place, what that allows for us, what it doesn't allow for us, and what's reasonable, and if it's even reasonable at all. Other issues, the proposed ordinance, hours of operation. I mean, it says 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. Why would you propose an ordinance for a dispensary to be open from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m.? It doesn't make any sense to me. We should have some discussion about that. Nothing in the ordinance about the employees of these facilities, about their ages, about the training. There's no requirements for that about that at all. Security measures. The only thing it says in the ordinance is working video surveillance. Well, that does not say anything about whether that's inside or outside. Doesn't say anything about the quality of the video, retention period of the video, the availability of the video to law enforcement should they need it upon request and without a warrant or court order. Should there be some sort of an alarm system set up? Remember, the dispensaries are cash business as it stands right now. They're a cash business that has a product there which is a target. So should we have an alarm system? Well, has anyone discussed that? We know about that? We can put that in our ordinance? We don't know. Environmental issues, as I talked about, we just don't know about that. Is there going to be an odor from these facilities? We had, Burgess Norton had a horrendous odor a few years ago. I don't know if you remember that. And it kind of permeated a big area. And everyone was wondering, what was that? Well, that was very bothersome to us. Do we know if we're going to have the same issue or a possible issue with any cultivation centers or the craft growers? We don't know that. So anyway, I don't think we're in a position yet to make a decision on zoning. We should look at other communities. We should look at the zoning ordinances of other communities that have been granted it. Look what they did, look what they discussed. Let's do our research, let's do our studies, and get an idea of what other options or what other obstacles we may be forced with. If we put it off for a while, a year or two, let this thing get off the ground, there may be issues or things that come about that we're unaware of right now. We can't even contemplate. If we enact an ordinance now that doesn't address that, it's going to be awfully hard to go back and try and amend that ordinance to make it more restrictive if we have to in the future. It's going to be very hard. And the business establishments, of course, will fight you on it. And maybe rightfully so. We are going to have our hands full. With the, and this is not the zoning, but just in general, just final thoughts. Marijuana is still an illegal drug. We still have federal regulations for pilots, school bus drivers, truck drivers, train engineers, subway operators, aircraft maintenance personnel, transit personnel, ship captains. They all are prohibited from using marijuana. And we rely upon that. We want that to be. And we're glad that the federal government has put those regulations there. At the same time, we want our community of Geneva to be able to do what they can to help us regulate and control and prevent the use of marijuana and any other drugs, whether it's alcohol, for our youth. This is not the marijuana of our youth. The law allows 30 grams of flower. This yields about 70 to 90 joints. Can you imagine that? So we're allowed to possess 30 grams of the flower. What does one need with 70 to 90 joints? And if you do have it, where's that going to end up? The problem is it could end up in our community with our kids, and of course it's going to. And with the THC levels that have gone up, they've gone up tremendously. And they keep trying to increase them. Where is the restriction on that? Who's restricting that? Who's telling us we can't increase the THC? No one right now. We have edibles. Edibles are going to be a problem for all of us, especially our kids. I had a young lady tell me in St. Charles, a 12-year-old, she went to her friend's house and her friend was smoking marijuana. Fortunately, she had a good sense to get out of there. But it's a 12-year-old in our adjacent community. So this is we're not going to get away from it. And by zoning is not going to affect this, but we still have to be aware of it as a community, as a city council, and how we're going to help our community address all these issues and protect our kids from this new law that has been enacted. Unfortunately, and I'll end up with this, that I think we as parents and grandparents need to be educated, need to be given the tools, which the city can do with the help of other community aspects, to guide us and how we help our kids distinguish and prevent the use of the marijuana and the edibles. If we, especially with the new law coming out, if I'm a parent and I have a young kid going to a friend's house to play, what if that friend's parents are smoking marijuana, or they have marijuana available, or they have edibles out there? That's something we're going to have to teach our kids about, or our grandchildren about. We have to say, how do you recognize this? Be sure you stay away from that. And if you see something, tell us. You have to have some method set up so that you can have a response, so you take them out of a bad situation. So we're going to see all kinds of new things that are going to come about that we haven't even thought about yet. So anyway, I just take it seriously. I think it's too soon to allow for medical dispensaries. Let's wait and get some history, and let's wait and get some history and experience from other communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Yes, welcome.
We all go eat some brownies and come back and like start this meeting again. That'll be great. I'm Lauren Byron. I live in Geneva.
Hi, Lauren.
I'm sorry to say that I missed the zoning board meeting. It sounded like it was a blast. I did read the summary briefly, and I just wanted to make sure first that I kind of understood the plans or the board's recommendation. My understanding was that it was recreational and cultivation were not recommended in any zoning districts, and then the others.
Recreational dispensary.
Right.
Correct.
Sorry. Yeah. Okay. So I'd like to echo, I think, what Paula and Steve said earlier, that I'm in favor of zoning different places to have this, whether that's a special use permit or however you choose to do it. I would zone more broadly, in fact, to include recreational and to include cultivation if it fits into the city's plan and makes sense. People have talked a lot about there not being examples of other places that have done this, and yeah, not in Illinois, but there are 13 states that have legalized. And I just, since a lot of the talk has been about the youth, the Colorado data shows that from 2005 to 2017, youth use of marijuana has stayed pretty much the same. So legalizing hasn't had a whole lot of impact on that. They've also shown that opioid deaths have been reduced by about 33% in many of the communities where they have legalized. So essentially, I think it's not going to have a huge impact on the youth in the way that people are kind of fearful about. I think it's something that adult residents of Geneva should have the opportunity to go purchase. I think we could use the tax revenue, and I'm also in favor of diverting some of that to be used for education and to give young people knowledge about the options that are out there and what drugs do to their body or don't do to their body. And I think the other thing that has come up, and I think it was even mentioned in the zoning board's notes, was things being in character with the city of Geneva. And I just feel like that's a really sticky phrase. But even if you were focused on the character of Geneva, if your concern is that the character of Geneva is people don't go out and get intoxicated, people should be campaigning to shut down all of the places that sell wine and beer. If the concern is that people think you shouldn't be able to go out and buy a medical substance unless you have a prescription from a doctor, then somebody should go talk to About Face, which I think sells CBD. Or depending on your definition of medicine, there's the Crystal Shop. And if people think the character of Geneva is that you can't go buy something to smoke, there's a cigar shop on 3rd Street. So I think it's a little hypocritical and disingenuous to say it's not in keeping with the character of Geneva. And I know inertia is a heck of a thing, and we can easily say, oh, we've never done this before, it's hard, let's not do it. But that kind of comes from a place of fear, and that's not the character I expect from Geneva either. Thanks.
Thank you. Cookie. I think that's Cookie. That's not Cookie. Forgive me, I thought you were somebody different.
Sorry.
How are you?
Good.
I mistook you for somebody else, as Mr. Kilberg laughed at me. Sorry, my eyes are shut.
My name is Julie Pouilly. Hi. So I think I missed the memo. I've been out of the country, and I literally ran here. I didn't realize this was just a zoning discussion, so I'll keep it to zoning. But when did we have the discussion, the moral discussion, or the discussion about the health implications, or the discussion about the effect on our youth? I missed that. When was that?
Well, let me answer it this way. I'm thinking very carefully how to phrase this. I believe in the long sweep of history with respect to this issue being discussed in other states and in Illinois, and I'm certain that others can validate or correct me, that discussion was everywhere. Everywhere. I attended multiple meetings from groups who are opposed to, who talk only
Here in Geneva?
all over northern Illinois. Hosted by a number of groups that we were all received invitations from organizations that hosted breakfasts and luncheons in Oak Brook and elsewhere to talk about the perils of cannabis. We also, I'm assuming, attended meetings talking about, as the young lady represented, perhaps the issue of fear of cannabis. Our charge as a city council is not to discuss, or as I stated earlier, to relitigate what the state of Illinois has done with respect to passing this legislation. Our charge is only on the zoning. And while that may seem uncomfortable, that is how we are charged, that is how we are duly charged to consider this matter this evening. I can guarantee you, every one of these council members, as does every one of the audience members, have a position with respect to the health and well-being, et cetera. But my vote, if I have to vote tonight, will be based solely on the zoning aspect. I have met with, and I know others have as well, and I'm not saying this to impress you, but to impress upon you, to assume there has been no discussion would be to assume that we have not heard from our constituents, whether they be in support of or in opposition to.
I guess what I'd like to say to that is the state of Illinois was the first state to pass this legislatively. That, for me, says it all.
Okay.
You know, they did not ask us. We did not. I'm still standing here with my voice trying to say, as the president of the Geneva Coalition for Youth for many years, as a member of the coalition since 2008, as the co-chair for 5 years of Red Ribbon Week, the irony was not lost on me walking up those stairs where we held those candlelight vigils, or 2 months ago where we signed a proclamation with the kids from the Geneva High School SAD Club saying we commit to a drug-free lifestyle, and yet 2 months later we're considering opening the doors to dispensaries, among other things. It feels surreal to me, but we'll put all that aside. Okay, recently, you were there also. We were at the leadership breakfast at the high school, and I had the great opportunity to speak with some of the Geneva police force, and I was asking them, I said, so, you know, how has the state of Illinois prepared you for what's to come? And they told me their first training is January 5th. And I think to myself, how long have we known about this? And yet even our police department feels unprepared for what's to come. So I just feel like we're moving way too quickly. And as John said, I concur with him. What is our hurry? Why not sit back and take a breath and see what's happening around us and see some of the implications and of some of the communities who've jumped in. If you look at, well, I won't even go there, but anyway, that's my, those are my thoughts. I would like to say, I did speak with someone recently. She's a real estate agent, a local real estate agent. I told her what was happening, and she was shocked. And she had a real concern about the housing market in Geneva. Have we done an analysis of that? What this zoning would mean for our housing, the price of our housing? I don't know. Has anything like that been done? Have we done any task force, created any task force to look at the implication of that? I don't know. I'd also like to share, I spend a lot of time, I grew up in Downers Grove, and I spend a lot of time out there because we partner with our Chick Chat workshops. We partner with Downers Grove. They write the curricula. It's sort of a turnkey, so I go out there often for meetings. And one day I got out there. It just happened to be at a particular time. I was in downtown Downers in Main Street, and I was waiting at the tracks, waiting for the train to go by. And all of a sudden I looked and I thought, oh my goodness, what's going on? So I asked one of our partners out in Geneva, I said, do you guys have a homeless shelter here? And they said, no, that's the meth clinic. People take the train to get there, and they're all going to the meth clinic. And I thought, whoa, this wasn't the Downers Grove that I knew. And for me, what adults choose to do with recreational marijuana, it doesn't really, they're adults, they can do what they want. With my coalition background, I'm mostly concerned for the youth in our community. I'm concerned about perceived risk. I think if we really sat back and we talked about it, didn't everyone say, what's the big deal about vaping? Yeah. The research wasn't done. A lot of people jumped into vaping, and where are we today? I feel like we're walking in that same direction. I'd rather sit back, do some research, look at what's happening around us, and then make an educated decision versus just making a decision on zoning. I think it's a much bigger decision that needs to make. And I'd like to go on what do I want to say? Like to go on
Record?
Not file record to say I'd really like to just take a moment and think about it and revisit it in a year. I don't know, but revisit it later. And I would also like to say, regardless of what happens, because we do know that there are dispensaries next door in St. Charles, which actually I have a friend that she owns a business, and it's they're fighting because the medical dispensary in her office complex is also now going to be a recreational marijuana dispensary, and there's all kinds of concerns. They just had a meeting on that. But I believe, regardless, we need to allocate money for education for families, education for community, on the implications so we don't have concerns about the availability to young people. I saw a study that said it was a new research study that came out. It was like in October, and they said for the first time ever, the kids that are vaping, these are kids that have never smoked cigarettes. The numbers are going up significantly. And they asked the kids, well, you never smoked. And they said, well, that's dangerous. But the vaping is, the perceived risk of the vaping is minimal. And my fear is in the future that will be the risk with the recreational marijuana. Anyway, I thank all of you for this really tough task.
Thank you.
I appreciate all the work that everyone has put into it, and I look forward to hopefully putting it off. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else from the audience? Seeing no hands, Mr. DeGroot, the floor is yours, sir, for a presentation. I kindly ask the citizens and council to wait till the end of the presentation for any questions from Mr. DeGroot. So any interruptions would not be acceptable. How's that?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just going to open up the presentation here. I'm going to leave it in this view because there will be some maps that I'll be zooming in and out of, so it'll just be easier to operate this way. Before I review the Planning and Zoning Commission's recommendations, I just wanted to do a quick reminder of what the city can do with our local authority. As the mayor mentioned, we can outright ban all cannabis businesses or opt out. We can enact reasonable zoning regulations for cannabis businesses. We can even limit the number If we only wanted to allow a handful or one or two, we can do that. We can require a special use permit for cannabis businesses. We can prohibit or regulate on-site consumption of cannabis. We can locally regulate consumption in a manner consistent with the act, and then we can impose a retailer's occupation tax. Well, we've done this thus far. We had the policy discussion back in September where the Committee of the Whole directed staff to prepare text amendments for the Planning and Zoning Commission's consideration that would allow and regulate cannabis uses. And then on November 4th, the Committee of the Whole recommended approval of an ordinance imposing a 3% sales tax should we allow dispensaries within the community. And then the Planning and Zoning Commission public hearing was held on November 14th. And after deliberation, they made a series of recommendations on proposed amendments related to the regulation of these uses. So what I want to do this evening is just take a few moments to make sure it's clear what was presented to the Planning and Zoning Commission and then what their recommendations were on each of those items. So from kind of a high-level overview, the proposed amendments were to add cannabis use categories to the ordinance and define them, to permit cannabis dispensing organizations as a special use in the downtown commercial mixed-use district, the residentially scaled commercial mixed-use district, the B1, B4, and B5 business districts. And I'll have maps later that kind of show each of these areas. It was to permit all cannabis business uses as a special use in the I1 and I2 industrial districts, to establish parking requirements for each type of use, and then to establish use standards for cannabis businesses, including prohibition of on-site consumption, separation requirements from other cannabis uses, and separation requirements from schools, daycares, and residentially zoned properties. So the first series of amendments is to amend section 11.2-2 of the zoning ordinance, our definition of words and terms, to add the various types of cannabis businesses you see listed here. Even if the city decides not to allow any of these uses, it's still necessary to make these amendments and define them in the zoning ordinance. Defining each use will remove any ambiguity about whether or not a certain type of use is permitted. By defining a use and not listing it in a zoning district, it's clear that it's not permitted in that district. If we define uses and it's not listed in any zoning district, it's clear it's not allowed in the city. If we don't do that, we can run the risk of it being considered a like use, like a dispensary can be considered under general categories like retail sales, or some of the processing and manufacturing could be considered a like use in industrial areas without additional regulation. So the definitions as they were presented to the Planning and Zoning Commission were unanimously recommended for approval. The next section that was proposed was to add a new section to the zoning ordinance called Cannabis Business Establishments. This section would establish standards that cannabis uses would need to meet for the city of Geneva to consider a special use application. The first is that a cannabis business must provide the city with proof of all required state licenses prior to operating. So this could be a condition of the special use if it's granted, that prior to being granted occupancy, they would have to display their license. That was unanimously recommended for approval by the Planning and Zoning Commission. The second is to prohibit on-premise consumption of cannabis. That was also unanimously recommended for approval. The third one is that a recreational cannabis craft grower should not be located within 1,500 feet of another craft grower or a cultivation center, whether that's medical or recreational. This is actually a requirement of the Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act. By incorporating it as a use standard, the city would then check for compliance during our review of a special use permit application. You could see that cultivation center, medical or recreational is struck through because we'll review that in a minute, but the Planning and Zoning Commission recommended that cultivation centers, medical or recreational, not be allowed in any zoning district. So that required an amendment to this section as well. The next is that a cannabis dispensing organization, medical or recreational, shall not be located within 1,500 feet of a property line of a pre-existing dispensing organization. Again, that's a requirement of the Act, and reiterating it here would allow us to check for compliance before or while we consider a special use application. And here we've struck through the recreational dispensary because the Commission recommended not to allow those in any zoning district as well. The next is that cannabis cultivation centers cannot be located within 25 feet of the property line of an existing school, daycare, or residentially zoned district. This entire section was recommended for removal because the Commission recommended not to allow cultivation centers anywhere within the city, so making this section unnecessary.
Is this 25 or 2,500?
2,500, yes. So the next amendment is just to renumber or re-letter Section F to letter E. This is not a state requirement, but the Commission recommended that cannabis business uses of any kind not be located within 150 feet of the property line of an existing school, daycare, or residentially zoned property. And then F was an addition based on the recommendations of the Commission to make clear that cultivation centers and dispensaries are not allowed in any zoning district. In addition to those use standards, in each instance that a cannabis business was proposed, it was proposed as a special use. And a special use requires a public hearing before the Planning and Zoning Commission. As we know, that requires notification to surrounding property owners within 500 feet. The Planning and Zoning Commission has to evaluate a special use against 9 standards, and the City Council also has to find that those 9 standards are met to approve a special use. And I just wanted to put these up here, so just to remind us what those standards are. It has to be consistent with the comprehensive plan, shouldn't diminish the property of the value of nearby properties, should not increase traffic congestion in the area, should be adequately parked, should be consistent with the character of the area, have adequate utilities, and the architectural appeal should be in keeping with the surrounding area. In addition to those, the Act itself has operational rules for dispensaries. Any business receiving a license from the state has to comply with these provisions, and these are just some of the notable examples. Cannot sell alcohol. There are hours of operation that were spoken about earlier. They have to comply with all building and zoning requirements. They can't have vending machines. They can't sell to people under 21 years of age. No delivery to customers. Working video surveillance, at least 2 people working at all times, and they cannot sell cannabis plants. So the first zone that we looked at was the downtown area and what uses might be appropriate in the downtown area. What was presented to the Planning and Zoning Commission was to allow dispensing organizations, medical and recreational, as a special use in both the downtown commercial districts. I'll try to zoom in on those areas. Bear with me one second. So the red color is the buffer from residentially zoned properties, daycares, and schools. And you can see that that creeps into the DCM district and the DRSCM district. So there will be properties in those districts that would not be eligible for consideration for a special use. But there are some along State Street, kind of in the core of the downtown on 3rd and State, and on South 3rd Street that would be eligible for consideration. That yellow ring represents 1,500 feet. So where there are state requirements that you can't have more than one dispensary within 1,500 feet of another dispensary, that's what that ring represents. So you're not likely to have a proliferation in the downtown area with that state requirement. The next area was to look at business districts outside of the downtown that would be eligible after having that 150-foot buffer. This is the B1, B4, and B5 business districts. The B5 district is primarily along Randall Road with Geneva Commons. We have some B4 south of the hospital along Kesslinger and Randall. Some B1 kind of catty corner from that was eliminated with the buffer. Some more B5 as you go south on Randall. Some B4 along East State Street. And then some B1 and B4 further on East State Street as you approach Kirk Road. And again, those yellow rings are that 1,500-foot separation requirement from other dispensaries or craft growers. So you could see that you would not have a proliferation in any one of those zones. The next proposal was to allow all cannabis business uses within the industrial districts, the I-1 and I-2 industrial districts. As you can see here, we struck through cultivation centers and dispensing organizations, recreational dispensing organizations, to reflect the Planning and Zoning Commission's recommendation. I'm sorry, I should back up to the B1, 4, and 5 districts. The Planning and Zoning Commission unanimously recommended not to allow them in any of these districts, the dispensing organizations. And the same goes for the downtown area. I'm sorry, I skipped through that. And in the industrial districts, they recommended to eliminate cultivation centers and dispensing organizations. And this map shows the different industrial areas. Primarily, we have I-1 zoning. We have some on Soderquist Court and Caneville, some on Gary Lane, some on South Street, some on South Batavia Avenue, some off of Glengarry, south of the McDonald's and Fuller's gas station, car wash, and then the business park on the east side. The areas on Gary Lane and South Street would be entirely eliminated with that buffer kind of creeping onto each one of those properties. So those would not be eligible for consideration. And this map shows the 2,500-foot buffer that's required for cultivation centers. So the entire red area, you could see, zones out almost the entire city with the exception of 1 or 2 parcels in the business park. And this buffer was only done considering the cities of Geneva zoning. It didn't factor in St. Charles zoning or their land uses, so it could be possible that those 2 properties aren't eligible either. The Planning and Zoning Commission recommended not to allow cultivation centers because for this reason, that there really isn't any opportunity with the state's requirements to locate in the city. The final part of the recommendation was regarding parking requirements for the various types of uses. So we had cannabis dispensing organizations. We treated as a typical retail use at a 4 per 1,000 ratio. Again, recreational cannabis dispensing organizations were scratched out here because they're not recommended for approval. And then we looked at craft growers, cultivation centers, infusers, and processing organizations as similar to other industrial uses that are either processing, warehousing, manufacturing goods, and apply the same parking requirements for that. And then the final category is for transporting organizations. Similar to other transporting organizations that we have, that parking requirement's determined throughout the special use process because it really depends on the size of the fleet and the operation on how many parking spaces would be necessary. So just to summarize the Planning and Zoning Commission's recommendations, they recommended to approve the definitions as they were proposed, to prohibit cannabis dispensing organizations and cultivation centers, to permit medical cannabis dispensing organizations, craft growers, infusers, processing organizations, and transporting organizations as special uses in I-1 and I-2 districts, to establish parking requirements for each type of use permitted, and then to establish the use standards as we reviewed and as amended. So the recommendation kind of maps out to be the 4 areas that you see the yellow circles are where those uses would be permitted. And again, that yellow circle represents that 1,500-foot buffer, so you'd likely be able to locate one dispensary or craft grower in each of those areas. But you could also locate transporting organizations and infusers in those areas as well. Trying to go through that quickly. I hope not too quickly.
Is that everything, David?
That is.
Can I ask you to put back the summary on the
Sure.
screen, since that is our launching point, if you will?
There we go.
There you go. As stipulated at the beginning of the meeting, if there are specific questions for David, now's the time to ask, excuse me, Mr. DeGroot, now's the time to ask. This portion of the evening is for consideration and discussion and debate by the city council and the city council only. So with that, anyone have any questions for Mr. DeGroot regarding what was been presented? Alderman McGowan?
Okay, thank you, Mayor Burns. I'll hopefully open it up, even though some of my questions may not be 100% clear, so hopefully you can help me with that. I guess in no particular order. I just wanted to get some more clarification regarding the process. If any type of cannabis-related business was approved in Geneva, it would be a special use. It would fall under the auspices of special use. So in that case, the particular business would have to appear before the Planning and Zoning Board for approval, but the proposed business would have to be approved based on 9 standards. Would all 9 of those standards need to be met at the Planning and Zoning Commission in order to advance to City Council?
Not to advance to council, but in order for the Planning Commission to recommend approval or the City Council to grant approval, it needs to find that all 9 of those standards are met in the affirmative to either recommend or to grant final approval. So the commission could find that 2 of the standards aren't met. They would be obligated then to recommend denial of the application or to recommend conditions that they feel would address those 2 standards and bring it, make them an affirmative finding.
And so if for some reason the Planning and Zoning Commission found that none of the 9 standards were met, I guess that would be, never mind, I'll take it back. My concern was that some of the 9 standards seem to be subjective. So I wanted to just get clarification on that. But from what you're saying, that answers my question. If not all 9 standards were met at the Planning and Zoning Commission, it would still advance to City Council. And then my next question is regarding something in your presentation. Can you just tell me again why, and I have a printout, but it's very small. Can you please go back to the map, just one of your maps that are highlighted, and zoom in?
Any area in particular?
Yes, so where it's the industrial area that's just to the right of that yellow circle in the middle. Yes, you were saying something that, nothing could take place there, or no, a certain type of business, cannabis business, could not take place there because, and I kind of missed the reasoning.
So the recommendation of the Planning and Zoning Commission was to include that 150-foot buffer from residentially zoned properties, daycares and schools. So that buffer encroaches upon each of those properties in that area, making them ineligible. That's a recommendation from the Planning and Zoning Commission and is not a state requirement. But that's why those properties would be ineligible.
I'm not really familiar with what schools or daycares exist in that area. Can you refresh my memory?
Well, you have the residentially zoned properties.
Oh, I see.
In the R1 district here, that kind of hatch-marked area, directly on the north side of Gary Lane.
Okay, so it's based on the 150-foot setback from residences. And isn't that where the Silvestri Sweets or Carousel Candies company is located?
Correct.
I'm curious.
McGowan,
I'm
forgive
sorry.
me. Mr. City Attorney,
we're looking at zoning generally. We're not with all due respect to the resident that may be getting an application to the state and who may be licensed by the state. We are not looking at any individual businesses, but looking at this on a macro, holistic zoning perspective. So it doesn't have any application to the gentleman's potential business.
So if in fact this council, for example, chose to amend what the Planning and Zoning Commission recommended and remove that 150-foot barrier, it would apply citywide, not just in one particular zoning area.
Thank you, and that actually brings up another question that I had. Can then, say we did approve the 150-foot setback citywide, can then an individual business come forth and request a zoning variance under the special use application?
No.
And can you explain the reason for that, just so we all understand?
Yes. That's not a criterion for special use. Special use ordinance is for all applications that require special use. This would be our zoning ordinance text, which would mean that is not a consideration for special use. That would be over and above. So if they're in that buffer, they do not qualify.
Okay, thank you. And then just stop me if I'm not able to get this information at this point, but it seems like there was some discrepancy regarding like where the 150 feet began and ended for a particular business that happened to be mentioned this evening, but can someone tell me if...
Historically speaking, we have measured whether it be 100 feet, 50 feet, 75 feet, 2,000 feet from property line to property line.
The buffer as drawn here is from the property line edges of the residential zones and schools and daycares. So not from the business building, but from the edge of the property line.
Okay, thank you. And is there a current alcohol and tobacco setback requirements in the city of Geneva?
Not from a zoning perspective. There are some separation requirements through our licensing requirements from churches and a few other uses that there be at least 100 feet away.
Okay, thank you.
Let me just add one comment. Alderman McGowan asked about whether or not someone could appeal that zoning standard. It also applies to a liquor license. There is no appeal to that setback requirement, even in the liquor license issue. So and we have had several requests, and unfortunately, it just can't be accomplished. So, Alderman Bruno.
Thank you, Mayor, and I'll apologize early in the evening because I'm sure we are going to be bouncing around to all kinds of different portions and making motions on various aspects and different licenses. But while we're talking about the setbacks, when I review this, it seems to fall into three categories. There's retail dispensaries, growing, and everything else. And the everything else is processing, infusing, transport. I know there's more.
Cultivation, craft growing.
Oh yeah, craft growing. So, but yeah, so that's in the growing aspect. So the, well, you've got that industrial area up there, so I'll talk about that. So now that is an industrial park abutting residential, and a lot of our light industrial does abut residential. There's a printing outfit on there that has, that smells like natural gas every so often, so that definitely impacts. There hasn't been any setback requirement for that. It seems like the everything else category outside of retail and growing, it seems like it's a white box, if I can invent a term, that you don't necessarily know what's going on there. There's trucks that come in like any other industrial use. So if we've got other uses in those areas that impact neighbors, I don't see, this seems like one of some of those seem like less impactful than uses that are already there. I don't know where this will end up or when we'll start making motions, but with for things outside of retail and growing, I'd be perfectly fine with eliminating that 150 feet buffer. And I'm sure I'll speak again on other issues.
Anyone else from the dais? Alderman Burkhart.
Thank you, David. It was mentioned that the municipal league's kind of model ordinance had a 250-foot setback, is that right?
That's correct.
What was our discussion for decreasing that to 150?
We mapped out several different buffers. I do have some of those maps I can share as well. But it was really about keeping a reasonable opportunity in the different commercial zones. If you start applying a higher buffer, you really start limiting the opportunity to even be considered eligible, and then you're more or less considering a prohibition ordinance. I can go through some of those. So this is 250 feet. You really start eliminating all of the uses on Randall Road and Geneva Commons, everything but a few outlots, South Randall Road. Really eliminate that entire industrial area. And then in the downtown area, you've eliminated the entire RSCM district, with the exception of maybe a few properties. So it was about keeping that reasonable opportunity. You eliminated the B4 district on East State Street. And of course, if you go higher, it gets worse. So that's 500 feet, 750 feet, and so on, until you're zoned out. Yeah.
And then we're talking about schools, residential, and daycares. Was there talk about churches or I think parks, libraries were mentioned tonight?
There was some consideration of churches and parks. Most of the churches we have are located in residentially zoned areas, with the exception of a few in the downtown area. If you apply that buffer in the commercial zones as well, then you eliminate the rest of that commercial zone for consideration. But the majority of the churches we have are residentially zoned. The same with parks. Most of those are in residential zoning districts. When you start applying that buffer again in the commercial zones, you eliminate the rest of the commercial zone, or a significant portion.
If a church operates a preschool out of its building, will that count?
We've tried to map every one that we could find.
Okay. Great. That's it for me right now. Thank you.
Alderman Kilberg.
Pan to the right, we have an industrial park out there. Wouldn't that be an ideal site for this type of?
That was one of the areas that was recommended.
Yeah, you didn't mention it though. I mean.
I'm sorry, I thought I had.
I mean, our industrial park that has space open, wouldn't that be, if somebody came to the city and they wanted to build a facility, wouldn't that be the first option that you would reference probably?
The I-1 zone was one of the areas where we recommended that all the uses be considered as a special use.
Right.
Again, cultivation centers really weren't eligible with that.
Right, understood. I'm just saying though,
right.
As far as handling trucks or some of the issues as it relates to manufacturing, we've got FONA out there and we've had issues as it relates to odor concerns, as it relates to FONA previously. So, I mean, if we're going to have any of these types of issues, it would be better to have it in the industrial park, I would think, than right in the midst of an industrial, or in the midst of a residential area. I mean,
that was one of the 4 zones that were recommended, was that industrial park. And then
the other thing is following up on her question, as it relates to churches and summer Bible school, Our churches have active youth programs. Would they fall under the same umbrella as preschools and daycare and some type of an instructional program? I would think that there would be symmetry there, and that it wouldn't be a great stretch to consider those types of outreach programs provided by churches in our community as an extension of the zoning. Has that ever been discussed, or has there ever been any issues raised as it relates to that on a zoning matter previously?
We have not gotten into that level of detail with the church's programming. We looked for churches that did have preschools or daycares, and we tried to map those. And then again, a lot of the churches are already in residentially zoned properties, so the buffer already applied to those areas regardless of what programming they had going on, or if they even had a preschool.
That's all I have for right now. Thank you.
Anyone else from the dais? Alderman Swanson.
Couple questions. One, the 2,500 square foot setback for cultivations, is that a state law for that one?
That is a state requirement.
Okay, so that is it. And then if you were going to propose a brewery or a distillery in any of these locations, would there be a setback?
There's not a setback requirement. In the zoning ordinance, they do require a special use permit.
And the IML proposal for the 250 feet setback, was that for all of the cannabis operations?
That, I believe that was in the draft, their draft ordinance. And again, that's something a community can apply. They don't have to apply a setback requirement. It is varied by community. I believe St. Charles did 250 feet. I think Elburn had theirs reduced to 100 feet or 150 feet. So it's really case by case what's appropriate for each community.
And the 150-foot setback from a residential, what is the intent? What is the protection being afforded? What are we trying to avoid?
Really just that separation of use, looking at what is a reasonable setback. 150 feet is about half of a block, so you're getting about a half a block separation from those uses. It's not an extensive setback.
I understand the distance, but I'm looking at the differences in what you're doing there. And that goes back to my initial question. If you have a distillery there, what's the difference between that or an infuser?
That's a good question.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else on the dais who has not yet spoken wishes to speak again before I recognize Alderman Burghardt for a second time? Alderman Burghardt?
I'm sorry, so we don't have a similar setback for a distillery is what Alderman Swanson's getting at?
Right.
Right, okay. Do we have similar setbacks for any other use? Is this?
I mean, we have, as we mentioned earlier with the liquor license, you're required to be 100 feet away from certain uses, but that is for a liquor establishment that sells, I think, 80% or more. It's not for a restaurant with a liquor license, it's for a liquor store.
Which is a state law as well.
Right, and we also have some separation requirements for adult use businesses. That's a much greater separation requirement. That's like 750 feet, I think. But other than that, there's none I can think of.
Okay. And then can we talk about what the craft grower, how does that differ from a cultivation center? I mean, I'm looking at the definitions, but I don't see, is it amounts? Is that?
It's the size of the canopy area, so a cultivation center, I believe, is up to 210,000 square feet, and a craft grower is up to 5,000 square feet, so it's a much smaller operation.
Gotcha, okay. All right, thank you.
Welcome.
Before I recognize Alderman Bruno for a second time, is there anyone else who wishes to speak? Alderman Bruno, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, David. So the Planning Commission recommended no cultivation center, but the map showed that theoretically, that could fit in that one industrial park over by the airport, is that? I mean,
Right, it showed, really, this property as a potential, yeah, it was like basically two properties, and then, again, we did not factor in residential areas in St. Charles, where that buffer would likely encroach upon those properties and
okay,
eliminate that from consideration.
so there's, I'm trying to think, isn't, to the north of there, doesn't St. Charles have their own industrial uses along the
They
Counts
do, and but there's
corridor?
also some farmsteads in between in unincorporated Kane County. So we'd have to see how those would be considered by the state. The other thing that did play into their consideration was that you could see that kind of dotted line in the number 20 that represents a planned unit development. So that entire business park was within a PUD. That PUD would also have to be amended to allow for this new use. It has a specific list of permitted uses for that area. So I guess they viewed the likelihood as very slim to be able to locate in this area.
But theoretically doable. I don't know that we'd strike it just because we wouldn't expect it to be developed. But it does make me think too, if, let's say, a cultivation center was placed there before, let's say it met all the setbacks, and then someone wanted to, in St. Charles, wanted to put a school or a residential PUD, would that PUD be denied because it was within that setback, or does it become a non-conforming existing use?
So the cannabis use can only locate if it's not within in that buffer zone of a pre-existing church, school, residential zone. So those uses could come after the fact.
Okay. Well, I've got lots of notes here, but I guess point of order, Mayor, in terms of, is there a logical way to break down what we're discussing and voting on at any one time?
Well, we have a motion on the floor, which has been seconded, and that is to accept the recommendations from the Planning and Zoning Commission as presented. If anyone on this dais wishes to make an amendment to what has been recommended and placed on the floor, they are certainly permitted to do so once they have been recognized.
Well, I will throw out a motion.
Summary, David?
Summary.
On the screen?
I would throw out a motion that for processing, infusing, and transport uses, that the 150-foot setback be eliminated.
That's a motion to amend?
Motion to amend, I'm sorry.
The motion to amend what was recommended by the Planning and Zoning Commission is to eliminate for processing, transportation, and infusing the 150-foot buffer recommended by the Planning and Zoning Commission. It's to eliminate that. Is there a second to that motion? Seconded by Alderman Swanson. That motion as amended, or the main motion as amended, is now on the floor.
Do I still have the floor?
You do.
And I bring that up simply because those uses are less impactful than uses that we already have in those industrial zones. There's not an odor, there's not, what do you call it, an attractive hazard. I think we have far more intrusive uses in those districts already. Thank you.
Alderman Kilberg, then Alderman Maladra, on the motion as amended. On the amendment, excuse me.
Right.
Yes, sir.
In the process, how do the residents in the immediate area have an opportunity to voice any concerns that they might have if we take action this evening?
Through the special use process. Alderman Maladra.
So we've heard reference to an IML template that had 250 feet for all uses.
Yes.
What was their rationale?
Not sure.
That's not helpful.
I can speak to that
Let me
briefly, if
down.
I may. Alderman Maladra, their rationale was to create a template ASAP
Yeah,
so that all communities could consider that template,
yeah.
period.
So,
They plugged in a
so
250.
working ASAP sort of reflexively in the common course of business, 250 feet popped into their head.
That's in essence exactly what happened.
250 feet is also the standard notice requirement by the
Standard notice
state
requirement is-
for impacts to adjoining properties when you notify a special use. That's also that standard impacted radius that you notify. So I don't know if they use that for their rationale.
Okay. So we're rushing, and we've heard ample comment tonight, and later on I'll give some of mine about what is the rush. So that rush seemed to me to be erring on the side of caution and being a little bit more conservative. In our rush, we've already reduced the setback once from 250 to 150, and now we're proposing to go to none for these specific uses.
Just to clarify, the state did not require a bare.
I understand, but we are rushing. And
Those are your words.
although Alderman Bruno's comments are trying to think of a good word.
Was it brilliant?
Yeah, that wasn't the word I was thinking. The fact is, we don't know what these uses are. There is nothing in Illinois that we can point to and say, oh, here's how it works, and here's what the negative effects are, or the positive effects, or anything else. So from my perspective, I'm comfortable with the 150.
Still on the amendment, Alderman Caven.
Thank you. You'd made a comment before, so if the 150 was removed, you said that there would still be opportunity for public comment through the special use portion, but
Correct.
if there isn't any distance, then there is still, I guess by removing that portion, I'm having difficulty understanding how somebody would still have that opportunity to voice opposition or anything if it's completely removed and not one of the requirements. So I might not be.
Yeah, because there's still 9 items, there's still 9 special use items that have to be considered by the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Okay.
Those 9 uses are debatable, if you will, through the public hearing process at the PZC meeting. Much like if this council chose, which we have in the past regarding development, whether it be on the Randall Road corridor, East State Street corridor, or anywhere else, we've recommended amending, and if an application comes through based on that amendment and it still goes before the PZC, that's where the public hearing takes place.
Okay, I think that, thank you.
Certainly.
So, since it would still be special use, there would still be, as far as some of the other parameters and the 9 items that are listed up there, if it was for a specific business or any business that's already existing, there would still be that opportunity where they would need to come and show and make sure all the 9
Exactly.
the 9 areas are still met. There isn't any other extenuating circumstances, whether it would be some type of maybe smell that was emanated or anything else that could potentially occur. Those would all things that would need to be satisfied in order for that potentially to be approved in that scenario.
That's, or recommended forward to the
recommended
council.
for.
And I should also add, and I believe Mr. DeGroot commented on this earlier, the Planning and Zoning Commission also has the luxury and the, what's the best word? The prerogative to add additional conditions should they so choose, which we've also seen as a community on a number of occasions.
Okay. Thank you.
Certainly. Alderman Ruby on the amendment?
Thank you. I guess I'm wanting to take a little bit of a step further back. I feel like by making this amendment, we're assuming that we're all in favor of passing this portion of it.
Unfortunately, you have to speak to the amendment.
Okay.
If the,
So I don't know how else to word that, but that's my
there
concern.
will be a vote on the amendment.
Okay.
If the amendment fails, the floor will
Okay.
be wide open.
Okay, thank you.
Certainly. On the amendment, Alderman Marks.
So David, could you show on the map what that would open up then for uses? Just so I'm clarified on that. If we reduce that?
So in the instance of Gary Lane, it would open up all of those properties as eligible for a special use for those three uses, the processing, infusing, and transportation uses, but not for craft growers, cultivation centers, or dispensaries. It would also open up Burgess Norton on Western and South Street, another property on South Batavia Avenue, or maybe a couple of properties there, and maybe a property or two here on off of Gary Lane and Commerce Drive.
And the term, forgive me, but the term "open up" is perhaps misleading. It's,
but what areas would it affect?
correct. Bingo.
If that's what it is, I was just trying to see what areas it would truly affect.
Right. Eligible for consideration, correct? Alderman Marks still has the floor.
No, I'm fine right now.
Anyone else on the amendment? Seeing no additional comments that are desired, no hands, no unusual faces that we're not all used to. Alderman Bruno?
Just to be clear, this is only for those three uses, processing, infusing, and transport.
That is correct, as the amendment was offered, correct. Seconded by, I believe, Alderman Swanson.
And so to clarify, an aye vote would be to eliminate the buffer.
That's correct.
A nay vote is to keep the 150-foot.
That is correct. A simple majority is required. Whenever the clerk is ready, we will take the roll on the amendment.
Ruby.
Nay.
Caben.
Aye.
Kilberg.
Nay.
Maladra.
Nay.
Marks.
Aye.
McGowan.
Aye.
Swanson.
Aye.
Bruno.
Aye.
Burkhart.
Nay.
Clements.
Aye.
The amendment passes with 6 affirmative votes and 4 nay votes, 0 absent. Back to the main motion, folks, as amended. Back to the summary, Mr. DeGroot, if you could.
Sure.
Thank you, sir. BTS, back to summary. Anyone on the main motion as amended?
So,
Alderman, who was first? I forget. Alderman Ruby?
Okay, no, I just was seeking clarity on, with the vote that we just made, exactly, I just want it spelled out exactly what we're voting on next, please.
Oh, what we're voting on next, that's up to the council.
Okay.
We have a motion that's been amended, so it is the main motion now.
Okay.
This council can do one of 3 things. Amend that again for consideration, debate, discussion, and a vote. They can accept the main motion as amended and vote. Or this council could also offer another motion to do all sorts of fun things. So that's the options.
Okay.
Alderman Ruby, anything else? Alderman Bruno, then Alderman Kilberg.
Thank you, Mayor.
It's his third time.
This is a whole new matter, though.
The,
That issue's been resolved, therefore the slate is clean.
Oh, okay.
Correct? Okay.
So we've got, are we going to be, right now we're voting on the entire body of what was recommended.
That's correct. As amended.
As amended. Would it make more sense? I think it would, I think we could more easily wrap our heads around it if we could break this into some components. I don't know what those components are. Or would that create more problems than,
I would recommend that you do exactly what you hope to achieve via an amendment.
okay.
And you can certainly use those triangles as perhaps your guideposts.
Well, while I have the floor then, I'm just going to go through the whole thing.
Oh, goody.
Thank you, Mayor. We are not litigating whether this is good or bad. This has been litigated at the state. Again, I see this falling into different categories. Nobody's arguing that tobacco, alcohol, or cannabis are health foods. Whatever we do here is not going to impact legality. That's been decided. Availability. I have no problem getting gasoline, even though there's not too many gas stations in Geneva. It will not affect consumption in any reasonable or in any important way. There's 55 million users that are already using it, and many of them in Geneva already. It will not impact, whatever we do tonight will not impact the number of impaired drivers. And I don't think we could be, I think it would be hypocritical for us to treat this somehow differently than alcohol and tobacco, which is much more visible to children. So when I did surveys, I did a survey of downtown merchants, and I got overwhelming support for retail sales downtown. That surprised me, but it has changed my thinking on this. And if we're looking at extracting revenue such that we can apply that to education, to enforcement costs, field test equipment, I think I'd be remiss if I did not pursue putting retail sales, both recreational and medicinal, back in this ordinance. So I would move to amend the ordinance to return retail, medical sales and retail recreational sales of cannabis.
All commercial districts? Or specific districts?
Well, it was completely, give me some insights here.
It was stricken entirely from the community.
Yeah, stricken entirely from the community.
It was,
but just in retail districts.
It was originally proposed for the DCM, DRSCM, B1, B4, B5, I1, and I2 districts. So to reinsert it back into those districts?
Yes.
Okay.
So all the districts. The amendment on the floor?
Well, including downtown.
Right,
Yeah,
which
that
would
would
be the first two.
So the motion is to reinstate retail sales and medical sales of adult use cannabis in all districts throughout the community, as stated by the...
As originally proposed?
As originally proposed.
Okay.
Is there a second to that motion? Second. Seconded by Alderman Swanson. On the matter regarding the amendment, Alderman Kilberg, Alderman Maladra.
I don't want to speak to his amendment.
Okay, Alderman Maladra.
Okay, so this is my opportunity to speak about the whole thing, I guess.
Well, we have to speak to the amendment, regrettably.
Gets to the amendment. Because at the heart of the amendment, I think, is what it is we intend to do as far as opting in or opting out. At the end of the day, there still is that question. We're told this is just a zoning matter, and it's not. It's a question of whether or not Geneva chooses to opt out. If we do nothing, we're automatically in. In order to get out, we have to take specific action, and so the discussion tonight is about that specific action. The discussion around that specific action, the hot point seems to be exactly what Alderman Bruno is proposing putting back in. the ordinance. Mostly focus has been on dispensaries. And as Alderman Bruno indicated, we're told that the debate tonight is not about the legalization of recreational marijuana use, that the state of Illinois in its infinite wisdom, which to me seems to be an oxymoron, has declared it to be legal come January 1st. So maybe it's not a debate about the legalities, but it is a debate about whether or not the community of Geneva wishes to facilitate and profit from the recreational use of marijuana. We're told that our decision has no impact on public safety, as Alderman Bruno said, because the fact of recreational pot use is upon us. We still have to deal with whatever problems may arise, whether the product is bought in Geneva or elsewhere, perhaps. But if it is a problem, then our decision is whether or not we want to be a part of the problem. And so to a certain extent, it comes down to whether or not you think it is a problem. We live in an age of easy access to studies. There are studies that conclude that it's a problem for any number of reasons, and there are studies that indicate the opposite. What I can say definitively, as a not so long ago parent of teenagers and a former member of a student safety and well-being task force that this city established during my first term, is that I don't see anything different in 2019 than I saw in 2003. That in all those years, nothing has changed. There are no studies saying definitively this is a problem, nor are there studies saying definitively this is not a problem. What I also know is that the American Medical Association was opposed to recreational use in 2003, and it remains opposed to recreational use in 2019. I know that area police chiefs were and remain opposed. I know that county prosecutors stated their opposition then and now. I know that teachers, not necessarily in an organized voice, but individually spoke against it in 2003, and we've heard from teachers at both of our meetings and at the Plan Commission meeting in 2019. These are voices we usually pay close attention to. The one voice that we do not usually pay close attention to, interestingly enough, is the state of Illinois. But in this case, we're placing a lot of reliance on that wise body. One thing none of the studies disagrees on is the fact that THC is an intoxicant. It gets you stoned. We're not talking about solving world peace, world hunger. Perhaps, oh, Steve left. Perhaps we are talking about social equity in some indirect sense. But mostly what we're talking about is one additional way to get high. That's what this hours and hours of debate is about. And absolutely, but in addition to THC being an intoxicant, so are beer, wine, and gin. I agree with that, but I say that as a community, we have certain protections in place with alcohol that we will not have with pot. Sellers of alcohol are licensed by the city, so action in the case of an irresponsible seller is direct and timely. We do not have to appeal to the state that may or may not have another perspective about a problem that affects us. Action in cases of irresponsible use, well, there we have a little bit of a problem because you can't prove irresponsible use of marijuana. Your breath, if I smell alcohol on your breath, it's pretty good. Well, it's an absolute certainty that you've been drinking. If I smell marijuana on your person, maybe you've been smoking, or maybe you've been in a room where somebody's been smoking. There just are no field tests to indicate driving under the influence. So this presents a problem for law enforcement and for businesses alike. We heard earlier tonight about all those truck drivers, bus drivers, the 24/7 people. If you have no way of proving under the influence, it becomes an employment law challenge, among a whole lot of other things.
Point of order, are we still talking about the zoning, Mayor?
Yeah, I'll get there. No, we're not talking about the zoning. We're talking about opting in or opting out.
Which is
Zoning
a
is an issue.
zoning matter.
Yeah, the zoning, I think, is an issue we hide behind. If I want to sit here, and if I want to.
I respectfully disagree. We are, I have no joy
All right.
in having to state in public that I will not, let me change that. All of you have chaired meetings before, and you have been advised by city attorneys that the crux of this meeting should be on this topic and those issues related to that topic. To allow variations there too becomes a cluster.
Okay, so then, in relation to that topic, how does zoning make it an opt-out decision? How do I reach opt-out if all I talk about is whether or not some industrial use should be allowed in an industrial park? When do we get to say whether or not we opt in or out?
Well, we don't have you can certainly make a motion to that effect if you'd like.
Well, I'm not sure. I will get to I believe this is about zoning. The question before us is, do we choose to allow the sale of recreational cannabis, true or false? So I'm explaining why I'm opposed to that. It's long-winded, maybe it doesn't make sense to you, but it'll get there. And in general, I do want this council to say we're opting in or opting out. I think that to hide behind zoning as a generality is not taking the bull by the horn.
But the very essence of opting out is a zoning decision.
Okay, fair enough. Right, and that's why we decided to go to Plan Commission in the public hearing process.
And despite,
And now we're proposing to do things that they didn't recommend.
That's correct.
Yeah.
The Planning and Zoning Commission.
Right.
Correct.
Who acted based on the public hearing.
Well, that's debatable, no question, with all due respect. Yeah,
Oh, I know.
absolutely. And as all of you know, from watching the hearing, the public hearing and the Planning and Zoning Commission recording, not from reading the transcript, but from watching the recording, or reading the minutes, excuse me, you will note that, with all due respect to the PZC members, once the issue of recreational cannabis dispensaries was resolved, unanimous vote on all other elements that we see tonight.
Fell into place, right.
So it is no surprise to anybody that this discussion has been and will continue to be about perhaps that one element of the Public Act.
And that is what this amendment is, and that is what I'm talking to.
That's true.
Okay, so I'm going to start over because I got lost.
Oh, God, don't start over.
Just kidding. All right. So what I was talking about is the equation of pot with alcohol. And I'm willing to concede that if people are willing to concede that we need the same protections that we have with alcohol. And as I indicated, we don't have direct action against irresponsible sellers. We don't have any action against irresponsible use. So this, to me, presents a problem for law enforcement and for businesses alike. So here's where I see a problem. We're ignoring voices we usually pay close attention to. We're placing heavy reliance on the state of Illinois, which is something we never do. And we're proceeding without the means necessary to protect ourselves or to manage this use in the city of Geneva. Other people may not have a problem with that, but I do, and so that's why I'm bringing it up now. If we allow this dispensing of recreational marijuana, we need to explain why. We need to explain why we turned away from trusted voices to embrace an industry we lack the tools necessary to govern. We need to explain why we see it as being something that maybe we don't need those same protections for. We make the comparison, but we don't expect the comparison in terms of governance. And personally, although this isn't pertinent to the amendment regarding the other uses, if you don't want it sold here, I don't know why you'd want it made here, grown here, processed here, or anything else. But since we're just talking about the amendment for these reasons, and I don't want to get into a debate about whether it's healthy or not healthy, because that debate is at least 15 years old and has not been resolved. I definitely don't want to get in a debate about whether or not it's legal, because I think I would lose that. But I do want to say that we're embarking on a journey with something where, once again, we lack the tools to manage any negative outcome from it. And so I would oppose your amendment. Thank you.
Still on the amendment. Anyone else wish to address the amendment? Alderman Caven.
Thank you. You know, we heard a lot of comments this evening, and I don't want to rehash everything that was said, and obviously we've all heard much feedback regarding this overall issue and specifically the amendment to the the initial or the new motion to the initial information. But I guess where I come into this, with respect to the zoning, you know, not having recreational or medical dispensaries, I definitely would like to leave that the way that it is rather than the amendment that we're talking about right now. It does bother me that this isn't legal federally. Somebody else from the crowd stated today that, you know, this was decided by our state. This wasn't decided on by a vote of people that live here. I don't really see a reason. I feel like this has all been very rushed, and I think the evidence by a lot of the discussion we've had tonight is, even regardless of where you fall, whether you're in favor or not in favor, I think it's difficult to argue the fact that this is definitely, or at least to me, it's obvious, this feels rushed. This feels like this was partially done haphazardly. And if we don't wind up, you know, allowing this right now, 3 years from now, this might be the new normal, where it is legal everywhere. It's not any different than a liquor store. There may be additional protections, or there may be additional ways to test and monitor. And I would certainly be open to having that discussion again at a time a little bit further down the road, but I don't feel like that's where we're at right now. You know, one of the other things that I read, this was last week, so I got this from the Kane County Chronicle article last week. So if something is incorrect in here, I'm not taking the blame for that. But there was an article. I believe it was Heather Steens, Heather Steens, Illinois State Senator. I believe she was one of the sponsors to the original bill. Last week, the state, Stans said, well, while the follow-up measure referred to as a trailer bill was mainly about technical changes, more substantial changes could happen in the future. We did not want to go back and revisit policy at this point in time, she said. We know we may do that going forward, but we want to first get this up and running and see how it actually works. So when this is somebody who sponsors the bill and already acknowledging the fact that, you know, and most likely there will be additional changes, and that's not to say that things remain stagnant. There's always things that are going to continue to evolve and change, but looking at that and, you know, the things that we don't know and what some of those changes are, and having this be something new to this state that wasn't voted on by residents and people who live here. I mean, for me, when I read that, I was like, okay, well, this is somebody who sponsored the bill. Well, they're not 100% positive how it's going to work. Now, if this does become the new normal, and this is everywhere, and this is a financial windfall, I know that we also are, you know, limited at this point in time with how many licenses are going to be given by the state. If this works how it's actually planned to go, there's no way that the state doesn't increase that. If there's going to be that much additional revenue and this is that successful, Geneva will have another chance to opt back in at a later time if they want to. I would rather take that approach. Again, that is a little bit of trajectory on my part. Maybe the state won't do that, but if it actually does work, the state doesn't really have another option because they need the money more than anybody else in this entire country. So if it really winds up being that successful, Geneva will have another shot at it once we have a little bit more knowledge about how this works. At least that's my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Alderman.
I have
Burkhart, was
a
it?
comment.
And then Alderman Gilbert.
You know, I appreciate Alderman Maladra's and Alderman Caven's comments. You know, how many of you drove this evening to City Hall? Okay. Has anybody looked to see what the ramifications of the legalization of cannabis in Illinois will do to your automobile insurance? Has anyone looked to see what's happened in other states as it relates to automobile insurance? We talk about a 2 or 3% windfall as it relates to additional sales tax. But the thing is here the Illinois resident is going to be duped again, thinking that, oh, this is going to be additional revenue that we didn't have previously that all of a sudden we're going to have. And the fact is the taxpayer or the resident of Illinois who drives an automobile or a vehicle is ultimately going to pay additional for that privilege. Or I don't know if I would call it a privilege. But the thing is haven't heard any discussion on that. And the research that I've done has shown that there is an impact. And all this money that we're going to be bringing into Geneva from a dispensary and the sale of cannabis isn't necessarily going to equate at the homeowner's level. I look at cities like Arlington Heights, Downers Grove, Elmhurst, Highland Park, Lake Forest, Lake Zurich, Libertyville, Lisle, Naperville, Wheaton, and even Kane County. Kane County Board opted out. I think the idea that maybe we should opt out and make an assessment on this after the state's had some history with it would be a wise choice. I'm not an early adapter. I've never been an early adapter. And I think anyone that jumps in on this day one is an early adapter, and there's consequences as it relates to being one. That's it.
Thank you, sir. Alderman Burghardt?
Could we talk about the zoning districts that would be included in Alderman Bruno's amendment? And could we get a map up just to talk about those?
And if there's any acronyms used, David, please describe those acronyms.
Sure. Yes, yes.
So we have the DCM district, which is that downtown commercial mixed use. The DRSCM, which is the downtown residentially scaled commercial mixed use. Again, these yellow rings are the 1,500-foot buffer from other dispensaries. You have the B4 district along East State and around East Side Drive. Also some east of Kirk Road. You have some B1 zoning at Kirk and East State Street. And then the B5 district along Randall Road, where you have Fabian crossings. You got B4 south of the hospital, and then B5 again with Geneva Commons. Sorry?
Industrial?
Oh, I'm sorry, in the industrial. So all the same industrial areas we've been looking at. On Gary Lane, Soderquist Court, south of Batavia Avenue, and then the industrial park on the east side and on Glengarry Lane.
And the setback for those would be 150 feet too for the dispensary, or?
Right, because that was not included as
Oh, we
one,
took
of the, one of the three uses.
Wait.
So,
No, it would still be
No, yeah.
150 feet.
right, so we
Right.
would still have the 150
We're
foot
discussing,
buffer.
yeah, exactly.
So still 150 feet setback from those, okay. I mean, I feel like this is the vote really tonight. This is, and I guess I'm frustrated that that's how we're dealing with this. I mean, I feel like so many issues that come before us, I don't know, it's very logical, and this is so massive, and I feel like I just keep looking at those arrows, and I kind of wish we were dealing with this last and had dealt with, definitions and parking and things first. I guess also, where do we talk about the social equity piece that, Mr. Anderson was there, tying social equity to this sort of piece? What about a limit on, St. Charles Limited said they'd give out 2 or allow for 2.
Right.
I mean, are we saying if we were to say yes for this amendment, that every place we say a yellow circle, you could have, if they can get the license from the state, that we could allow that?
No, they can apply
Applying
to the city
under the special use.
under the special use standards, exactly.
And people within 500 feet of the site would be
So notified.
notified by
Exactly.
mail. I think I am comfortable in the industrial zoning. I'm struggling with the other zoning districts, and maybe that's my, in between being an early adapter and being a wait and seer. That's where I am, I guess, right now, so, thanks.
Thank you. On the amendment, ladies and gentlemen? Anyone else wish to speak before I recognize Alderman Bruno? Alderman Bruno?
I'd be amenable to a friendly amendment if you want to separate industrial and retail districts.
Yeah, let me confer with the city attorney. I believe
Someone
there's
else needs to make a motion to amend yours. You can't amend your own motion.
So I was telling you she could if she wanted.
Anyone can. You're giving permission?
I'm,
But then we still don't deal with a number, we still don't deal with the social equity piece. I just feel, I don't know, this is just, it feels backwards or
The social
something.
equity piece is primarily addressed through state legislation.
What about setting apart funding for if we want to
But
put
that's
a
an
little
issue
bit of
that we can
funding
decide through a
to?
budget process, too. Yeah. I'll give you an example. I've received multiple phone calls from multiple people asking whether or not they can, quote, get a license from Geneva. And I have to explain the process, that it's not Geneva that issues the license. Then you walk through that process with respect to the social equity elements. And you can hear them checking off boxes or not checking off boxes to determine whether or not they're going to get to the front of the line to perhaps be considered for a license. And then, of course, there's the fee for that state license. Only until all those elements are combined and that puzzle is put together do they even reach out to Mr. DeGroot or whomever and say, hey, I'm approved, can we sit down and talk? Is Geneva an opt-out community? Or does Geneva have opportunities for exploring such uses? And that's when it all begins. And then through the special use process, and of course, ultimately to the council, we have that final determination. In my humble opinion, based on the BLS statistics, based on the way the state's issuing these licenses, and we all know this, Elgin's in, North Aurora's in, Elburn's in, South Elgin's in, St. Charles is in. What's the likelihood of Geneva being issued a license for any of these? Who knows?
How did St. Charles deal with the number two? Or how would somebody?
Medical dispensary.
One
primarily.
on each side of the river.
One on the east side, one on the west side, exactly. And I attended those meetings,
I'd
as
like
I
to.
did the Batavia meetings as well.
Okay.
Alderman
Yeah,
Burghardt,
I'll give up the floor right now.
I think I still had it, but, you know, I did kind of give it to you. But I did want to address as far as we have, cannabis would have far more protections than does alcohol and tobacco. We've got, any kid can walk into any store and there's banks of nicotine and coolers of alcohol. You can't even go into a dispensary unless you're age 21. In terms of the state, state polling shows that 2/3 of the state residents are in favor of this. So if there were a referendum, it would, you know, the fear that we don't have, you know, field tests or other problems, that's kind of moot. We will have impaired drivers, whether we opt in or opt out. Wait and see. I do worry about, given the feedback, the overwhelming feedback I've gotten from merchants. I think there might be some lost opportunities if those merchants couldn't take a swing at the piñata for a year. Auto insurance, again, whether we're in or out, that's an Illinois thing. So I don't think that's germane to our discussion here. And yes, while I think it's really important that we address social equity here, I think we can we don't have to get in the weeds on that today, but I would amend or revise my motion.
Unfortunately, you
Oh, I
can't do
can't?
so,
Oh,
sir.
okay.
But the opportunity
We
for
have a
anyone
motion
else
on
to
the
do
floor.
so is certainly
That's fine.
available.
Okay.
With that, I recognize Alderman Malaja, then Alderman Caven. This is still on the amendment, ladies and gentlemen, offered by
So,
Alderman Bruno and seconded by,
just out of curiosity for me, who licenses tobacco sales?
who licenses tobacco sales? The state.
Oh, my God. And they're buying tobacco illegally even though the state of Illinois licensed it. Must be greater protections with
We
pot.
run compliance checks too. Yeah. The state and us, right? Yeah.
Just like liquor.
Yeah, it's just like liquor, Mr. Malaja. It's the state and the city of Geneva does.
I made my point, like
Yeah.
Ed said, but it's wrong.
Alderman Caven.
The only thing that I would add is, I know that Alderman Bruno did a lot of reaching out to different residents, and especially in the business district. I know several people that own businesses in downtown Geneva as well. So if you haven't had one person tell you that that's not what they wanted, then we certainly haven't spoken to all of those same downtown business owners, I would certainly say. And if 66% of people in Illinois are in favor of this, I'm not even gonna argue that one, but I don't think that 66% of Geneva residents want it legal. So regardless of what the rest of the state wants, at this point in time, I'm not really concerned about the rest of the state. I'm worried about here. So I would add that as well, but that's it, thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone on the dais who wishes to perhaps consider amending Alderman Bruno's amendment, which was seconded by Alderman Swanson? If not, we will, yes, Alderman Clements.
Well, let's keep it going. How did you want that amended?
That would be improper. Yeah. You want to throw it out there, and we'll,
Yeah, remove the downtown district. I want-
to
yeah.
amend
Yeah.
his motion to take the downtown district out of having dispensaries.
Correct.
DCM.
DCM and the DRSC, SOB, GOD, God, HELP, us all. Okay.
On the amendment.
On the amendment, there's an offer by Alderman Clements. Is there a second to what the august council member has suggested? Second. Seconded by Alderman McGowan. Okay, now on that amendment, folks, comments? Alderman Burkhart.
So then we would just be talking about the business district, which is east side mostly? And
Yeah, B1, B4, B5, I1, and I2.
Correct.
Can we see the map again for that?
So we have B5 along Randall Road, B1, yes. So B5 along Randall Road, some B4 along Randall Road, B1 at Brisher and State. We've kind of eliminated the downtown with that motion. B4 on East State, B1 and B4 on East State, and then the industrial districts again. The purple zones.
And again, but there's no limit on how many we could give out or cite.
Not presently. That can certainly be a consideration by this council.
Could I amend the amendment to say 2? Only 2?
I gotta take an aspirin, hold on. for a second. You can, but be very careful on the words you choose. Is it 2 of each? Is it 2 of just the recreational dispensary? Is it 2 of growing? Is it 2 of the, so just, we're talking right now on an amendment to dispensaries. We're talking about adult use recreational dispensaries. So if you'd like to amend that amendment to limit it to a certain number as you so, that's fine. You can even eliminate it by geography if you'd like, or excuse me, limit it to geography if you'd like in your amendment.
I would amend it to allow for 1 medical dispensary, 1 recreational dispensary.
Throughout those zoning districts?
in those two business and industrial that we just outlined.
Is there a second to Alderman Burghart's amendment?
Second.
Seconded by Alderman Clemmons. Okay, folks, we are now talking about the Burghart amendment, seconded by Clemmons. Alderman McGowan.
So, for clarification, Alderman Burghardt, are you saying just one medical dispensary and one recreational dispensary for the entire city of Geneva, or?
Yes, that's what I'm envisioning as a start. I mean, I think we're moving pretty quick, and there's some towns that have opted out entirely. This would be a way to dip our toe in the water, and I do think, like Alderman Caven said, if this goes the way it has in other states, there will be other licenses available. For a town our size, that seems a town you can cover from one side to the other in about 12 minutes. I think that seems entirely reasonable.
What route do you take?
Depends on the time of day. But.
Exactly. On the amendment, ladies and gentlemen? Alderman Ruby?
Thank you. Just a quick perspective. I don't think that limiting it or eliminating the downtown area makes sense. Either we agree that this is good, the right thing for our community, or it's not. So it should be, if it's okay on the east side, it should be okay on 3rd Street, is how I look at it. So just food for thought. Thank you.
Anyone else? Alderman Kilberg.
With this action, with this amendment, it seems as though you're channeling the dispensary to really the 3rd Ward, which I had 16 emails in opposition and 4 calls in opposition to a dispensary in Geneva. And again, I understand that there's other opportunities along the Randall corridor. I'm just saying, though, then all of a sudden, those industrial opportunities on the east side are going to be prime candidates. And the residents of the 3rd Ward that have reached out and contacted me are not in favor of this.
Alderman McGowan, excuse me, forgive me. Alderman McGowan.
Okay, thank you. Regarding Alderman Burghardt's amendment to only allow for one medical marijuana dispensary, that's
correct.
Okay, sorry, it's getting late. I really feel that that's prohibitive to Geneva residents who really could benefit from having a medical marijuana dispensary, and say there is a resident who lives on the far west side of town along Peck Road, to say that they have to travel, let's say, all the way towards Kirk Road just seems a little unfair. So and I also want to add, I do agree with Alderman Ruby's suggestion that if it's okay to allow a recreational and/or medical dispensary in one particular area, like the far east side or along the Randall Road corridor, then it should be okay to allow either one of those types of businesses in the downtown area as well. But just for the sake of the fact that we do run like it's an east-west layout, the town of Geneva, or the city of Geneva runs east-west. I think it makes better sense to have at least one medical dispensary and one recreational dispensary on each side of the town. Fox River does not exactly run straight through the middle of Geneva, but it is definitely a big division between east and west geographically. So that would be my preference anyway. Thank you.
Anyone else on the amendment? To the amendment, offered by Burghardt, seconded by Clemmons. Anyone need clarification on the amendment offered? The amendment offered by Alderman Burghardt, seconded by Alderman Clemmons, was to eliminate medical marijuana dispensaries and adult use recreational dispensaries from, allow,
To limit
to
them
limit them
one
to
each.
one each in those districts, back to the, but not in DCM and DCR, exactly. Simple majority carries the day, ladies and gentlemen.
I'm sorry, can you just repeat that? Someone was.
Essentially, it would be to permit one medical or one recreational, and one recreational, in the B1, B4, B5, I1, or I2 districts.
So a vote of nay would take us back to the.
To
the Bruno.
Bruno original amendment, which is to allow no limit in all of the zoning classifications, basically other than residential.
Mr. Clerk, when you are ready, sir, again, an aye vote.
Essentially, this is a motion then to opt in, right? Is that,
Yeah, all of it has been, theoretically, yes.
I mean, but this motion specifically, though, would be a confirmation of the various points that were presented by David.
There would still be a vote on the entire
There's no-
ordinance.
Yeah, still an ultimate vote, yet. We're going through the amendment process now.
Okay, this is just strictly related to zoning then?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Mr. Clerk, whenever you're ready, sir.
Okay, Gilbert,
Nay.
Maladra,
Nay.
Marks,
Nay.
McGowan,
Nay.
Swanson,
Nay.
Bruno,
Aye.
Burkhart,
Aye.
Clements,
Aye.
Ruby,
Nay.
Caven.
Nay. According to my records, folks, the ayes are 3, the nays are 7. The amendment fails. We're back to the amendment as originally offered by Alderman Bruno and seconded by Alderman Swanson.
Are we the one to remove it from the
Correct. We are back,
business district,
we are back to the one,
from Clements?
that's, no. Stephanie, chime in. We're back to the original.
We're back to the original Bruno Swanson amendment, which is to permit recreational and medical dispensing organizations in the originally proposed zoning classifications of B1, B4, B5, I1, I2, DCM, and DRSCM.
Point of,
That motion was amended by Alderman Clements. They took out the two.
Took out the downtown.
D, CM, and the mixed use.
and Burger was a separate.
Work our way backwards, exactly.
I apologize, we work our way back.
Is Alderman Clements' amendment to the Bruno amendment.
So which eliminates downtown.
That eliminates
downtown
the
zoning
DCM
for
and the
dispensary.
DRSCM.
That's right.
On that amendment, folks.
I'm sorry, say this again. This is why, like 10 o'clock, I'm thinking.
Well, we do have to make a vote here in about 3 minutes to
Yeah, but-
continue. or not.
So this one is to permit recreational and medical dispensing organizations in the B1, B4, B5, I1, I2 districts.
Without limitation to the.
Without
number.
limitation to the number, and it excludes the DCM and the DRSCM.
Anyone from the dais? Alderman McGowan?
If I may try to sneak in another abridged motion before we hit 10 o'clock. And that would be to, similar to Alderman Burghart's previous motion, which we voted on, but to allow for 2 medical marijuana dispensaries and 2 recreational dispensaries to be located in the, I'm going to need help with the different zoning definitions. In the zoning areas that we previously discussed in the Burghardt,
Clements or?
in the Clements motion.
Okay, so that's every zone, that's B1, B4, B5, I1, I2.
I'm sorry, I need to zoom in on the map.
She's adding
She needs you to zoom in on that.
What zone are you?
And that's the Clements one.
That is, right.
With a cap of 2 on each side.
Correct, yes. And if I could further add to that, to stipulate that there be one medical dispensary and one recreational dispensary allowed to be located on each side of the river.
Next to a Dunkin' Donuts.
Is there a second on the amendment offered by Alderman McGowan?
Second.
Seconded by Alderman Bruno. We are addressing that amendment, ladies and gentlemen, and that is, in essence, to allow for one recreational adult-use cannabis operation and one medical cannabis operation on both sides of the beautiful...
On each side.
Each side.
Both sides, on the beautiful bucolic Fox River, within the zoning districts as stipulated by the city attorney. Alderman Swanson?
Thank you, Mayor. I think we're confusing ourselves with all of these amendments, and to me, it would be beneficial to have a vote on whether we're opting in or opting out, and then decide, do we want limitations on it? Do we want zoning limitations? Do it in that manner, because otherwise, we're not even focusing on what we're deciding here. That's my suggestion.
Which is a fair suggestion, but doesn't speak to the amendment. It's an appropriate motion at the appropriate time.
You have to be recognized first, but you're recognized to speak to the amendment.
I don't like the amendment for that reason. Thank you.
And of course, we could have done that 3 hours ago.
Point of order, 10 o'clock.
Is there a motion to continue this meeting beyond the 10 o'clock bewitching hour? Motion by Maladra, seconded by? Seconded by Swanson. All in favor, say aye.
Nay.
Aye. Is there a nay?
Nay.
Hold on, let's take a roll call vote.
This is a vote to go late.
Well, wait a second.
One second, yeah.
This is a motion to adjourn, right?
Oh, this is a motion to continue.
Oh,
To continue the meeting.
okay.
All those in favor of continuing this meeting beyond 10 o'clock, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Nay.
Okay. Chair recognizes it as an aye vote, but nevertheless, roll call it is.
Okay, Bruno.
Aye.
Burkhart.
Nay.
Clements.
Aye.
Ruby.
Nay.
Caven.
Aye.
Hilberg.
Nay.
Maladra.
Aye, provided we get a break soon.
Marks.
Nay.
McGowan.
Aye.
Swanson.
Aye.
Motion passes 6-4. We continue. I have no clue who had the floor.
Well, we're talking about Jeannie's motion.
Correct.
That's
but
right.
Who seconded that?
Captain.
Got it, okay, on the amendment offered by the McGowan amendment.
So to restate the McGowan amendment, amendment with the stipulation that there...
2 and 2 on each west side and east side, whatever districts there are.
I know. Wait, we don't make the decisions after 10 o'clock.
Hearing none, seeing none, Mr. Clerk, please take the roll on the amendment offered by McGowan, seconded by Bruno.
Maladra.
Nay.
Marks.
Nay.
McGowan.
Aye.
Swanson.
Nay.
Bruno.
Aye.
Burkhart.
Nay.
Clements.
Nay.
Ruby.
Nay.
Caven.
Nay.
Kilberg.
Nay.
Motion fails, the amendment fails, with 2 affirmative votes and 8 nay votes. We are back to the Clements amendment. No questions, no comments. Mr. Clerk, whenever you are ready, please read for the record the amendment.
This one is to permit recreational medical dispensing organizations in the B1, B4, B5, I1, and I2 districts. It eliminates the DCM and the DRSCM.
Mr. Clerk, please take the roll.
Marks.
Nay.
McGowan.
Aye.
Swanson.
Aye.
Bruno.
Aye.
Burkhart.
Nay.
Clements.
Aye.
Ruby.
Nay.
Caven.
Nay.
Kilberg.
Nay.
Maladra.
Nay.
Motion fails, 4 affirmative votes, 6 nay votes. Now we're back to the original amendment.
Motion to adjourn?
Seconded.
There's no second required for a motion to adjourn. The motion to adjourn is on the floor. We take a roll call vote. Those wishing to adjourn can vote aye. Those wishing to continue the discussion, vote nay. Mr. Clerk, please take the roll.
Bruno.
Nay.
Burkhart.
Aye.
Clements.
Nay.
Ruby.
Aye.
Caven.
Aye.
Kilberg.
Aye.
Maladra.
Nay.
Marks.
Aye.
McGowan.
Nay.
Swanson.
Nay.
It's a tie, and I vote nay. We continue the discussion.
Mr. Chair, I move for a 5-minute recess to allow the council to stretch and use the restroom if
No
they'd like.
objection required, no objection from the chair. We do so, we turn the microphones off. The meeting is reconvened, ladies and gentlemen. And
Bruno and Burkhart, so we.
on the floor, ladies and gentlemen, is still the Bruno amendment.
No. Clemens motion.
No, it's the
We voted that down, you're right, it is Bruno.
The Bruno Swanson amendment.
Yes.
Do I need to repeat?
You
So,
need to repeat for the benefit of all 6 people left watching.
so that is to permit recreational and medical dispensing
Can we wait for Alderman Bruno?
organizations.
Meeting has been called to order. We continue.
To permit recreational and medical dispensing organizations in the originally proposed zoning classifications of B1, B4, B5, I1, I2, DCM, DRSCM.
No additional comments, no additional questions. Alderman Swanson?
The way I look at this amendment is really a decision whether or not to opt in or opt out. We're adding the recreational dispensary back in. After that, if this approves, we go back to the original Plan Commission recommendations, and then we can move forward from there. But I think we're to the point, the elephant in the room is this amendment. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes,
I'd
sir.
like to offer an amendment to Alderman Bruno's motion,
Yes, sir.
that if in fact the motion is successful, that we would restrict or eliminate the access or availability of any area in the 3rd Ward to a dispensary.
I don't know if that's an amendment. I have to defer to the city attorney because it sounds as if it's a,
It's a condition based on something passing, so I think you can reword that if you wish to amend Alderman Bruno's motion.
Yeah, I'd like to amend it to prohibit the placement of a dispensary in the 3rd Ward.
it's an appropriate motion. Is there a second to that recommendation / motion offered by Alderman Kilburg? Seconded by Alderman Ruby. On that amendment, ladies and gentlemen, are we prepared to vote on that? Any questions or comments as to the, yes, Alderman McGowan?
Thank you. I do have a question. Could David, yes, could you show us on the map which sections of the 3rd Ward would then be?
It's the entire 3rd Ward.
Well, which areas encompass the 3rd Ward that are highlighted on the map?
I don't have the ward map with me, but the industrial area, yeah, I mean, basically all of it.
It would be everything north of East State Street. It would be east of East Side Drive, and it would include the small area of residential north of Good Templar Park to the river.
It would also include I-1 and I-2. It would include, yeah, from Couts Road all the way to East Side Drive, north of Route 38.
So by excluding the 3rd Ward, would there be any area whatsoever east of the river that would still be open to consideration?
Doesn't appear that way. Maybe a little, if it's on the south side of State Street. That's Ward 5, correct? Yes. So there would be some on the south side of State Street.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Alderman Caven.
So does an aye vote right here on this amendment then permit dispensaries in the other portion of the city?
No. No, an aye vote on this amendment prohibits it within the third ward only, and then we return to the amendment, or excuse me, the motion as amended, if in fact this is successful.
So,
This is a carve-out, pure and simple, this is a carve-out.
okay,
Imagine if, never mind. Yeah,
I got you.
Great way to do it.
Mr. Clerk, please take the roll whenever you're ready, sir.
McGowan.
Nay.
Swanson. Bruno.
Aye.
Burkhart.
Nay.
Clements.
Nay.
Ruby.
Aye.
Caven.
Nay.
Kilberg.
Aye.
Maladra.
Nay.
Marks.
Nay.
The amendment fails with 3 aye votes, 7 nay votes. We're back to the amendment previously discussed by Alderman Bezanson from 1974. Merritt King, I believe, made the first motion back then. Questions or comments on that amendment? Seeing none, hearing none. Alderman
I need
Burkhart?
a refresher again. This is me after 10 o'clock now.
Permit recreational and medical dispensing organizations in the originally proposed zoning classifications of B1, B4, B5, I1, I2, DCM, and DRSCM.
Unlimited everywhere.
Not residential.
Non-residential.
And
It allows them.
so, yeah, no limitations. Can I hear from who made the motion
Limitations can be
about,
discussed at a future date if this council so chooses,
as in tonight, or?
as in
Are you crazy?
whenever.
But if this were to pass,
This is opt-in.
yeah, this is basically opting in.
If this would pass, you would still have to have an application from somebody who has approval from the state, and then would have to go through the special use process if that gets approved when we go back to the original motion. This doesn't just allow somebody to just come in and set up shop tomorrow, or, excuse me, January 1.
So this is basically following staff recommendations, opting in everything but residential with a 150-foot buffer from
No
our
buff, the buffer's been removed, for this one, correct.
dispensaries, okay? This is for medical and recreational.
Correct.
Just the dispensaries? We're not talking craft
It's just dispensaries.
growers, anything here?
This is just the dispensaries.
And if I were to vote in favor of this, we would have to go through, any limitations would have to come after this. Right, so, perhaps they would get voted down. So this is a kind of carte
Or you
blanche.
can amend with limitations right now if you so choose. We've tried that. Which we've tried, but
We've had secondary.
I'll make a friendly amendment to say one medical and one recreational limit. We already did this.
we've already considered that, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
So it has to be
All right.
different.
It's amending to a different amendment, though.
Yeah. That's carte before.
I defer to the city attorney with respect to the process, but it's,
It's not Clemens thing, so it's the original, so it's, yes, it's a different, it's a different amendment.
So I
Okay,
have
then
a
it stands.
question
There's a-
about the amendment, if I could.
we need a second to put it on the floor. Seconded by Clemens. Alderman Maladra?
I don't know how to put this. I think that some of the nay votes to the previous attempts at a limitation amendment were due to the fact that people were voting against the whole concept in its entirety. Is there a way to not deal with amendments like this until after we determine if we're opting in?
Well, there's
Or
a, yeah,
the answer is yes, but not now, because there's a proper amendment on the floor.
Right, okay.
there seems to be a cacophony of requests being
Failed.
made in absentia regarding, why don't we just opt out? Or what have you.
We're in, just take the
But
vote
that
by
was
one.
discussed and I believe relayed at the very beginning of the meeting at 7:05. So I think because now we're halfway across the river, we have a choice. Do we return to shore or do we continue to the other shore? That's up to this council. We have the amendment on the floor, though, so we have to at least
guess-
dispense of that, no pun intended.
In my defense, I just see there's opt-in, there's opt-out, and there's something in the middle that I'm comfortable with. And if I can't get a majority of this council to agree with me to be comfortable with that, then I'm having trouble giving carte blanche.
Sure.
And I know other suburbs have figured out a way around this of giving one license on either side of the river, and I'm surprised that we as a council can't get to that point. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Clerk?
Okay. Can I get a clarification on what this amendment is right now?
This is,
Right up till
Ms. Dawkins?
this is to permit recreational and medical dispensing organizations in the originally proposed zoning classifications, which is essentially everything but the residentially zoned classifications, but limiting one of each, one medical, one recreational.
Okay, and that was moved by,
Moved by Burghardt, seconded by Clements.
Whenever you're ready, sir.
Swanson,
Aye.
Bruno,
Aye.
Burkhart,
Aye.
Clements,
Aye.
Ruby,
Nay.
Caven,
Nay.
Kilberg,
Nay.
Maladra,
Nay.
Marks,
Nay.
McGowan.
Aye.
It's a 5-5. I vote aye. We are now back to Bruno Amendment,
Modified by
modified by the Burghardt Amendment. To clarify, Ms. Dawkins will read what that amendment is. It is in essence.
Okay, so it is to permit recreational and medical dispensing organizations in the originally proposed zoning classifications B1, B4, B5, I1, I2, DCM, DRSCM, limiting one medical dispensing license and one recreational dispensing license. So essentially, it's like what you just voted on, but the last one was the limitation, now it's all together again.
Alderman Caven.
So what you just read, this includes downtown. This includes Third Street. This includes all of that as well. So if this gets approved, not only are they in, but if somebody applied and put one in, they can put it right down on Third Street.
If there's not another one already somewhere
Not
else.
another one already someplace else.
And if it meets all the special uses.
Okay.
And just for clarification, ladies and gentlemen, and as the good alderman knows, of course, downtown is not defined just as Third Street. Downtown is defined as East Side Drive to Anderson Boulevard. Understood, the district is, but nevertheless. Okay, Mr. Clerk, whenever you're ready, sir,
Voting
take
on
the...
the Bruno amendment,
That's correct.
which will always be called that. Burkhart,
Aye.
Clements,
Aye.
Ruby.
Nay.
Caven,
Nay.
Kilberg,
Nay.
Maladra,
Nay.
Marks,
Nay.
McGowan,
Aye.
Swanson,
Aye.
Bruno.
Aye.
It's 5-5. As mayor, I vote aye. Moving on. We have the entire package, ladies and gentlemen. Summary, please, Mr. DeGroot, as amended, which of course includes, I believe it's what, 217 amendments.
The summary as amended currently includes permitting recreational and medical dispensing organizations in the B1, B4, B5, I1, I2, DCM, DRSCM, limiting one medical, one recreational, and includes the elimination of the 150-foot setback for processing, infusing, and transportation uses.
Any questions or comments regarding this? Mr. Clerk, whenever you are ready, sir. Simple majority, ladies and gentlemen, is required. Question by
I'm
Alderman
sorry.
Burghardt.
Can we just go through each of these arrows and just make sure everybody knows what so we're talking about parking requirements, we're talking Could the next page, please, would be,
The-
sorry, the next summary, or the
The
next, second
the
page?
first summary was the proposed, this is the recommended
Okay.
amendments by the Planning and Zoning Commission.
And these are all the ones the planning commission,
The
Second
one
bullet
was-
point has now been amended.
right.
Right.
But everything else that we're going to vote on was unanimously approved by the planning and zoning commission?
Yes.
So our categories, where we're allowing the craft growers, processing, transporting in the industrial districts, they voted on unanimously in that? Okay.
That's been amended to remove the 150-foot
Oh,
buffer
right,
for infusers, transporters, and processing.
Parking requirements, use standards, so no use of cannabis on the, at the site. Separation requirements, meaning they have to have 1,500 feet between them, right?
Right.
So separation requirements from schools, daycares, residentially zoned, that's the 150 feet. Can we talk about the processing organizations in terms of, so those would be allowed in just the industrial districts?
Correct. Just the I-1 and I-2.
And are those the ones we talked about, the Planning and Zoning Commission said denied was the one that was basically not feasible?
The cultivation. centers,
Cultivation,
correct.
right, okay.
Correct.
Okay.
One moment, Mr. DeGroot, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. DeGroot, could we bother you for a moment?
Oh.
Back and visit it again.
This is stupid. Setbacks for churches too.
Alderman Burkhart?
Can we talk about the setbacks then? Where do the setbacks apply here?
The 150-foot buffer?
Yeah, buffer.
Would apply in all instances except for those three uses, the processing centers, infusers, and transportation centers. And those are only allowed in the I-1 zoning, or the industrial zoning classifications. So we've got that area on Kesslinger, Gary Lane, South Batavia Avenue, South and Western, and then the East Side Industrial Park in Glengarry.
Okay. I really like the setbacks, the buffers. That's all for me, thanks.
Alderman Kilberg, then Alderman
Yeah.
Bruno?
As it relates to property lines and setbacks, at several points in the document, they refer to pre-existing public or private preschools or elementary or secondary schools or daycare centers, daycare home, group daycare homes, part daycare, childcare facilities, or residential zoning districts. I would like to include in there churches, synagogues, and mosques. That's a motion.
Is there a second of the amendment offered by Alderman Kilberg?
Second.
Alderman Burkhart makes the second. So now what do we do? The phraseology was churches, synagogues, and mosques. There are other.
Should we just religious institutions?
Well, I would recommend other houses of worship, but I will defer to the motion.
And other houses of worship.
Second or concurs, I assume?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
I just want to make sure that we understand what's being proposed. So Alderman Kilberg, that puts it in for everyone, including for the processing, infusing, and transportation uses. Okay.
Does the council understand that? The amendment offered by Alderman Kilberg, seconded by Alderman Burkhart, in essence, returns the 150-foot buffer back into.
But only for churches, synagogues, mosques, and other houses of worship.
For all uses.
That's correct.
Correct.
And citywide.
Correct.
Correct, because that was already removed.
That was already, yeah.
All right, the question was not schools, daycares, et cetera. That was already removed under the previous amendment for processing, infusing, and transportation.
And so I just want to check with Alderman Kilberg. Your intent is to leave it at houses of worship, not include schools?
Microphone, Dean, if you're ready.
You can amend it.
No, I was just checking your intent.
But the schools are already included for everything except processing, infusing, and transportation. So it's already on all other uses, all other business establishments.
So then houses of worship will be for everything, including these three uses?
Correct.
So I'm just curious what's different about houses of worship from schools, et cetera, but that's okay, it's not that big a deal.
On the amendment offered by Alderman Kilberg, seconded by Alderman Burkhart. Any questions or comments? Hearing none, seeing none. Mr. Clerk, whenever you are ready.
Marks.
Aye.
Gowan.
Nay.
Swanson.
Nay.
Bruno.
Nay.
Burkhart.
Nay.
Clements.
Nay.
Ruby.
Nay.
Caven.
Aye.
Kilberg.
Aye.
And that's it.
Hey, I get a vote.
Yeah, Maladra.
Well, I'm sorry.
Are you sure?
Roger. What was your vote?
I vote aye.
The amendment fails with 4 aye votes, 6 nay votes. We are back to what you see on the screen as amended, which of course eliminates the 150-foot barrier for the
And
uses,
provides for
transportation.
recreational and medical dispensing organizations in the specified districts, limiting to one of each.
I have a motion as it relates to hours of dispensaries. I move that we move the hours of dispensing from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m.
Clemens seconds the amendment offered by Alderman Kilberg to limit the hours of operation for dispensaries. You're talking recreational adult use and medical? From 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. On the amendment, ladies and gentlemen. Alderman Burkhart.
No.
Oh, sorry.
Let's get ready.
Mr. Clerk, whenever you're ready, take the roll.
McGowan.
Nay.
Swanson.
Nay.
Bruno.
Nay.
Burkhart.
Aye.
Clements.
Aye.
Ruby.
Aye.
Caven.
Aye.
Kilberg.
Aye.
Maladra? Marks?
Aye.
Motion passes with 7 affirmative votes, 3 nay votes. We're back to the matter at hand as amended. Twice. Questions, comments? Or 4 times, excuse me. Mr. Clerk? Well, Alderman Bruno?
Just, my understanding, all of the parking is consistent with any other retail and industrial use. There's no outliers, there's nothing different really about it as far as parking.
As it was proposed, that's correct. We looked at typical ratios for retail and industrial uses.
Thank you.
Simple majority, ladies and gentlemen, is required to advance this matter. To advance to completion, for God's sake. Bunch of locutionists. Alderman Kilburg.
I need some clarification. In other words, to dispense alcohol in the city of Geneva, all bartenders have to go through a process, in other words, to serve alcohol in the city of Geneva. Is that correct?
That's correct. All workers, Bassett training it's called. Yes, sir.
Bassett training. Okay, what is in place as it relates to the dispensing of cannabis in the state of Illinois?
There is licensure requirements in the application and in the ultimate license provided by the state. There is that type of education and training requirements. But that is purely state level review and licensure. The city has no process involved in that.
Can we create a process in addition to the state?
We, Alderman Kilburg, we asked for that during the debate period in Springfield, believe it or not. We asked for all sorts of opportunities for additional licensure measures.
Actually,
Alderman Kilburg still has the floor.
That's all I have right now. Thank you.
Alderman Bruno?
as long as I'm recognized. So just to be clear, Bassett training is for serving for on-site consumption? Is it reserved? It is, so that's strict.
And retail sales too.
Okay.
It's training for
Packaged
purposes of
liquors.
Packaging, sales, recognizing when customers shouldn't be served. It's the entire handling of alcohol and beverages by licensed establishments.
Thank you.
Mr. Clerk, whenever you're ready, sir, take the roll.
Clements.
Aye.
Ruby.
Nay.
Caven.
Nay.
Kilburg.
Nay.
Maladra.
Nay.
Marks.
Nay.
McGowan.
Aye.
Swanson.
Aye.
Bruno.
Aye.
Burkhart.
Aye.
It's a tie vote, ladies and gentlemen. I vote aye. Any new business tonight by anyone in the audience and/or from the dais?
Well, it was probably new a couple hours ago.
Yeah, it was new. I heard Mondale lost. That's the new business. Motion to adjourn by Kilburg. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned, ladies and gentlemen.